I'm Tim. For those who regularly watch and probably already know me, or those who don't, in case you've got my name, I'm here tonight with Mosh. And yeah, we're going to be talking about fantasy combat and the fantasy genre and a fantasy setting, but coming from the perspective of two people who do actual real life sword fighting. So I guess in terms of my background, if you don't know me or don't regularly watch, I've been a historical European martial artist for, oh God, I guess started in 2004 technically. Yeah, so a while. I currently teach at the Old Sword Club, which is a club based primarily in New South Wales, in Sydney, and also in the Blue Mountains. But do a heap of online stuff because of COVID. Mostly specialise in 19th century saber and other 19th century weapons, epee, bowie knife, and whatnot. I've also done a bunch of unarmed martial arts, mainly boxing and submission wrestling, also taekwondo actually. And I've been a metal weapons reenactor for a couple of, probably 8 to 10 years. Did that for a bit. And then Mosh, you've got like a whole raft of experience. So what has Mosh done? What does the Mosh say?
So I play with swords a lot, and I think they're really sick. So I started with unarmed martial arts with taekwondo, then went into Kyokushin and Muay Thai, did some Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I used to fight for that, for Thai and Kyokushin, and then I went into HEMA, doing Silver's backsword, Elizabethan backsword. Went from that, learned sword and buckler, spent some time learning Bolognese as well, small sword, now rapier, and longsword now, and saber, and yeah, I've just done it like any weapon that I can play with, I've started trying to learn or play with, which is really sick.
Yeah.
But then I've also got LARP, which I've done that for a few years now. Where I help run events and also and things. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and that's sort of, it's kind of interesting because I mean, you did talk for us like last year about like LARP and sort of the actual perspective and like experiences you got in LARP and how that's kind of informed just a lot of how you do things, which will probably come up again tonight. So yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. So the format tonight is kind of a Q&A, because I didn't have any plan for this, just because I don't, I don't plan things like. But what I did do is I asked people to tell me questions ahead of time, so that way we've got a backlog of questions we can get started with. So we'll probably start on those and then move into the questions that people are asking as we go. If you do have a question, just chuck it down in the comments, chuck it in the chat, or in the comments, or like wherever you just type things. And we probably won't get to it straight away, but we will get to it. And yes, I think let's get with our first question, and I'll just get that up on screen. So there we go. So the first question is, this is probably a very Moshy question. How does it feel to ambush someone? So I think this is something you've done a lot in LARP.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, and I guess also the other thing, when this came up, I was like, at first I was like, yeah, I've ambushed people in metal weapons reenactment, but it's really, really different if they know that there's a big difference between an attack that you just don't see because you don't know where the enemy is, and just you rock up to a place and a bunch of people run out and attack you. Like that's a difference. What's that like? Go.
Yeah. So like when especially in reenactment or even in like battle LARP, stuff like that, when you step on field, there's an emotional consent and you're emotionally ready for the confines of the game. Where when you're in an environment like maybe a festival LARP or something that is much bigger, it gets really uncomfortable because you know those things may occur, or you may forget they'll occur, and you'll be doing something, completely forgetting what is happening, and have that occur, and it's just like, oh, this is definitely what I signed up for, and I just forgot it was part of it. And being on the other side of that, of like, it feels it feels like you're actually assaulting someone in like a really makes your stomach churn kind of way, and like it's really odd. Like, this is just a lot of the time for LARP, it's like foam wacky bats, but it's that emotional feeling of being your will overriding someone else's out of nowhere,
Yeah,
and
the
that
shock of that.
tension is really rough.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
how
I
does it
mean,
feel to ambush someone? Also, like, it depends how it's set up. If it's really spur of the moment and it's just as much of a shock for you as it is for them, like, oh, they are there, I need to do this thing now, and you go do it, that's that has a completely different feeling to you and your friends are sitting there prepping for this, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and then they finally get to the spot you needed them, and then all of a sudden the person that you can barely see does whatever the signal is. This happened at Brisbane, at their Swordcraft event, a couple of weekends ago that I went up for. It was the last couple of minutes of the game. We needed to get these. There were 5 keys to open up this big chest, and we had 4 of them. And this entire group of like 30-ish people had the last key. And they turned up to meet our 2 friends who had the other keys, and it was with the obvious intention of like, well, there's 30 of us, we'll staunch you for the 4 keys that you've spent your entire weekend collecting. Gameplay is only for another 45 minutes at most. They weren't aware that an entire group was already marching to the position while a good 20 of us were sitting around ready to just leap out from the shadows. And it was like at 8:30 at night and dark.
wow. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is.
And I just go forwards, shield up, and just take whatever little cuts I can and start cutting people. And we dropped them all. But that was such a sudden, just boom, crescendo of absolute violence. But it was still, you guys goofed up. And
Yeah,
that's a weird feeling.
yeah, imagine because I'd seen. I think, like, I guess I compare it to like a lot of role playing games. Like you play, Dungeons and Dragons, or like,
Mm,
sort of Saga of the Icelanders or whatever. And like an ambush is your party, roll perception, and then all of a sudden it's this very kind of, the question is just it just becomes this complicated question of, who goes first or who gets like a free hit in or whatever. But yeah,
yeah.
there's this whole emotional component where, and I imagine as well, especially for the people who were doing the meeting, who had to basically like stay calm and basically act like nothing was going on, that they were just about to be like that, this group was going to be overwhelming. That would be that would actually be quite a difficult, quite a difficult thing. And then of course you've got this whole thing of, we need to plan this, we've got to wait for we're going to wait for the signal and that. um, and then like we've got to make sure that no one goes off too early, that this is properly coordinated. um, and yeah, it's sort of it seems like a sort of a, like there's kind of emotional dynamic to it that I think we don't really think about very much when we, even in fiction, really, like when people write about ambushes. It's not there's not that whole sort of, you know moment of panic. So I've got a kind of follow up question from that. Um, yeah, so we've got someone, I think, or someone who, well, how do you actually ambush? Like, what are the tactics? What are the considerations for like working out how? What do you actually do to ambush someone? How did you guys do it? Like, was it a planned
Yeah.
thing that you were doing it that late at night, or was it just kind of dumb luck?
Nah, it was. fairly planned. It was just as the sun was going down was when the meeting was getting organized, and it was just kind of getting drawn back and back. And then the people who were organizing the meeting ran around and just grabbed friends, like, "Hey, I need you to help me with this thing." Right? And we were like, "Oh yeah, we'll help you with this because we all want to see the big cool box get open. That'd be sick." So we grabbed whatever armor we could, whatever weapons and shields we could, and the box was in the middle of the town where there was a tavern next to it with a beer garden and then a couple of other buildings around it. So we've all got like all our weapons and shields all up against in the shadows of the building and everything so that we could sit around and not look armed. And those of us who needed to wear a bit more kit, like just hid in the shadows behind the buildings. And we're waiting. And they're like, "They should be here. They should be here. Why aren't they here yet?"
You got that like that mounting tension.
So, the other group was called the Jaegers. They were an elf group, and right at the back of the venue, we're talking a good 700 meters away, was their camp. And like you have to go through the whole town and then go through down the path past a bunch of camps and then like over a bridge. So in the dark, we're tiptoe camp because they're leaving in case anything goes wrong. And then all of a sudden we see their torches. Like, and these are like flaming torches. And we have to run all the way back silently, hopefully ahead of them, trying not to trip over and eat shit. Running through the town, and then as quietly as possible trying to get that signal of they are actually on their way, get behind stuff, make sure lighting, like that you would avoid torchlight, everything like that. And then we waited for, actually was my best mate David, who was sitting next to the beer garden. They got a bit testy with him and he's like, "Now or never, let's go." So when someone started shouting out after he's come round and like stabbed a bunch of people in the back, I was like, "All right, everyone, go, 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 go." Everything gets very loud, very like chaotic, and what felt like only a minute later, I'm screaming, "Have we got the key? Is everything okay? Have we got the key? Have we got the key? Have we got the key?" And we hear, "Yes, we've got the key." Fighting as like we're just get this chest open to see what was in it.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. It's like kind of reminds me of if you ever read descriptions of the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So 1066, lead up to the Battle of Hastings. King Harold of England as opposed to Harald of Norway. Actually, both Harold. This was like the Harold versus Harold battle. But the English King Harold ambushed the Norwegians, Vikings, early in the morning, and you kind of hear about that where like there is this panic and there's this real difficulty in sort of getting everyone organized and not giving the game away. And it's something I think, in terms of actually understanding what's going on, it's a really difficult thing to coordinate. And there's this you really get the sense that, because, like if one person screwed up, like if one person that's in your situation decided to be a hero or like saw a spider and yelled or whatever, like the whole thing could go tits up.
Yeah.
Especially for something so spontaneous, it sounds like coordinating that would be a nightmare. So it's sort of like, so it's kind of like that logistical thing of how do you coordinate people.
Yeah, especially because like people wig out and go like, maybe I don't want to do this or whatever, which is completely fair. People get all, this hasn't happened yet. Is it even gonna happen? Am I wasting my time? Just all these things. You kind of have to like sell it like an investment almost.
Yeah, just keep people around.
Yeah.
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 So I guess something like
So I saw another question there that like tacks onto this really well, which is what goes through your head when you're suddenly attacked.
yeah.
I've been on the other side of that.
What like
Whoa.
yeah.
When I was less experienced at sudden stress, your brain goes into why is this happening? This shouldn't be happening.
Mm.
And you get into that kind of weird loop first. And that's not conducive to any correct action going forwards whatsoever. So if you can put someone else in that headspace while you're trying to accomplish a goal, they're obviously trying to understand what is occurring. You're a few steps ahead for free.
Yeah, and it's like more of a psychological thing rather than
Mm.
like so like it is actually it's something a lot of people really underestimate. And I mean, I guess comparing to again role playing games, um, there's a lot of medieval weapons that took a lot of preparation. Like armor takes time to get on. Like even like when I was doing reenactment, you still like it was a mark of an experienced reenactor that they could get into their chainmail by themselves. It still took over a minute to do. Um, and there's no way that you'd ever want to be wearing a chainmail whilst marching for a full day. And you've got things like bows, like really until you get to like crossbows with the bow where the bow bit is made of steel, of spring steel, you can't leave them strung. You can't like bows can't be left strung, so you have to string them, which like takes a few minutes. There's sort of this prep dimension where there's a reason why a lot of ambushes historically would have happened with hand weapons and not much armor, because you don't really have time to get much armor on. You don't want to be wearing armor all day. That's not comfortable. And you don't have time to string bows and stuff like that. You basically have to just grab whatever weapon you can and just go. And it's really like I guess it's like you're saying, this really kind of panicked moment where there's this huge psychological component of just getting your head into fight mode. Um, but I guess it kind of goes back to what you're saying about the ambush as well, where there's a flip side of that, where the people doing the ambush, they've got time to get into fight mode. They've got time to put on armor because they know they're planning to do this thing. They've got time to string bows and stuff if they really wanted. But they've also got the tension of doing that at the right time, not having people go off too early, not having the whole thing just explode.
For the way I could explain it real clear cut would be like the difference between you're jumping off a cliff into like a body of water and you've been pushed into a body of water. Like, and if two people at the same time had one of those things happen, who's going to react better is like how that feels.
Yeah. Like that kind of that ability to kind of switch mindset. That's something like a lot of like pro fighters, professional MMA fighters and stuff talk about a lot, is the psychology. Like it's they talk about just and what they do to kind of deal with fight nerves and things like that. Just being in the right headspace for what they need to do. Or sort of like I think that's kind of a thing we don't really think about much. But I guess from like a role playing, if you're any writers in the audience, going, who are trying to get ideas for the fiction, that psychological component is huge.
Yeah.
So sort of actually, this is kind of an interesting one. This is actually one we got a lot of different people asking. So I sort of paraphrase. There's a few questions that we're putting up now that multiple people asked, but a lot of people asked about gear. And I was like, and my historian brain goes, well, it really depends on the period, honestly. But I actually found this. Thankfully, I had a bit of time to prepare for this. One of the things that I actually found was this. Hopefully, I'm sharing my screen properly. This is a wonderful photo series of what historical warriors carry.
That's sick.
So back to 1066 was mentioned before. This is probably what a knight would have carried to the battlefield. Like, you don't really see any like camping gear or much camping gear and stuff like that. I mean, you do. I was thinking about this as well. Like, you've got like the cup and the bowl and spoon and stuff, and also the dice. And then I'm like, yeah, actually, there's a lot of. I mean, you know, a lot of in reenactment, like a lot of planning went into making sure that the battles were mostly fighting. People weren't just sort of sitting around waiting. But there's a lot of historical battles that lasted like, a day, if not more. But you look at like what people were doing. Most of the time was just people sitting around waiting for the enemy to get into range or waiting to be told what they were doing. Just kind of. So yeah, people probably would have had like food, stuff for eating and drinking with them because they would have needed to have a bit of a snack. But yeah, in terms of what equipment someone would carry, it really depends on the period. Historically speaking, and this is something you see in reenactment. Also, instantly, you can kind of tell that this is actually a reenactor's kit, because if you look at like the spear and also the sacks, like the knife down here, you can see that the tips are rounded.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of, if you want to get a sense of what a historical person recently carried, this is the maximum that a warrior at Hastings would have carried. I don't, I'd be surprised if someone carried both a spear and like a two-handed axe. Although I think this is meant to represent a mounted guy. You can tell by the spurs. So if you've got a horse, you can carry a bit more because the horse can also carry a bit for you. But yeah, and then you move into the Crusades. So mounted knight at Jerusalem. Again, like you got a lot of armor, little bits and pieces here and there to eat and drink whilst you're there. Like it's not like Skyrim or anything where you can carry like three swords and 5 axes and 20 cheese wheels or whatever. Like there was a wonderful Onion article which is like, video games give children unrealistic expectations of how many swords they can carry.
Actually, I got something for that. The other day, because I got a group of friends and I that train together once a week, and I was redoing all the tips on the steel swords. So I ended up with 4 rapiers and 4 long swords in my backpack, and it wrecked the straps on my backpack for like the 1.5 kilometer skate back home.
Oh yeah!
Like, wow, I didn't need to break my good carry bag for this, but here we are.
Yeah. When I started, when I first did HEMA, I did the thing that most HEMA people do, where they just try like every weapon. And there was one point where I was carrying like a whole heap of different weapons, first to uni and then to training, and just like when you go from really, I think this sort of stuff is really at the maximum that people can carry. And if you're dealing with metal armor as well, there's a reason that infantry didn't tend to be as heavily armored unless they had support, like they had a horse to carry their armor and stuff, because metal armor is really freaking heavy.
It's garbage. I wore just a leg harness for an entire day once at a festival LARP, and I was walking funny for the rest of my week event.
Wow. Yeah.
It was awful. Absolutely awful to do to yourself.
Yeah. This is the thing, is to get the Yorkers to the Battle of Bosworth, this would have required multiple people's worth of effort to get all of this armor, plus someone who is trained to use it to a battle. This is to deploy them to a battle. It's not. So it's like, I think a thing a lot of this is the thing with a lot of role playing games is you see people wandering around like full plate armor, and it's like, you wouldn't. You would get it carried until you get to the battle, and then you put it on as close to the battle as you could, just to conserve energy. Yeah, and you notice this as well.
I once paid someone in-game currency after a big battle to just take all my armor back to my camp because I was about to pass out. Like, hey bud, who wants some copper? Yeah, can you just take this pile of shit that I hate now because I want to die, all the way and just dump it out front of the tent that looks like it might be mine. And the guy's like, yeah, sure, bud.
Yeah.
I just fell over afterwards.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. I think a lot of like just how uncomfortable like metal armor is. Like you know, like if I was a fantasy adventure and I had to be like particularly traveling by myself or traveling with like a group of mates, trekking across country, I would not want metal armor. I'd want padded armor, sure, but you know, because that's padded armor, like gambesons and stuff, you know, are reasonably comfortable to wear. But metal armor, God,
And
no.
they're sick.
Yeah, let me
Yeah.
see this
No,
actually.
jack chains and a funny hat that also works as a helmet. Yep, I'm down. That's it. That's all I care about anymore.
And you notice as well, like so there's this idea that the reason why armor disappeared when muskets appear is because muskets could penetrate armor, but we know from historical sources that they couldn't, and there were specialized armored units right up until the Napoleonic Wars. But the difference is,
Mm.
3 people with muskets is more effective than 1 person in full plate armor and 2 other people whose job it is basically to get them to the battlefield, like to carry their stuff to get them to the battlefield. And you notice this as well with like the gear, the point where you start to see like bedrolls and actual like camping gear in a soldier's kit, like where they might, you know, they're actually needing to support themselves and like to, you know, basically carry with them all the stuff that they need rather than having it taken on a baggage train, is the point where muskets come in, because it's just about getting like weight of numbers, and 3 muskets to a battlefield is much better than 1 person in full plate. It has nothing to
Yeah.
do with combat efficacy and everything to do with
Logistics.
yeah, like the logistics of it. And, you know, it's just like you get to the Napoleonic period, like, you know, this is like you've got like a full camp kit, you've got rations, you've got like full on gaming boards and stuff as well. Like this person is carrying a lot,
Yeah,
and
because
you
he's
get
going to
into
spend a lot more time living as a person
yeah. Well, and also like
than
there's not
fighting as a soldier.
yeah, but also there's also not a huge baggage train to support him. I think like it's one of the things
Mm.
actually I one of the things in reenactment that doesn't get mentioned a lot is like military campaigns were big affairs. Like it wasn't just a bunch of dudes going out and, you know, like camping the woods. It was you had a lot of women, you had often children as well and stuff, just coming along with the armies. Like you had what they call camp followers. Um, the
And
thing
campfires and stuff like that.
the reason this doesn't get done in reenactment that often, like you don't get depictions of camp followers, is that many of the women involved were sex workers, and you know, not a lot of people want to portray sex, you know, historical sex workers for some reason. But yeah, like it was this massive baggage train. Then you get sort of to the age of firearms, and you know the baggage trains get smaller and smaller as the you know as soldiers are being required to carry more and more of what they need to live. Like, you know, it's like this, you know, the one we're looking at now, this person's got a good chunk of their stuff, and then as we get into World War One, like, you know, a World War One era soldier is carrying with them most of what they need to live. Like they're carrying, you know, a single person camping kit. Um, Doubly so for like, you know, look at what like a World War Two era soldier, and then you get into the Falklands War, and essentially modern soldiers have got like proper bedrolls and stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of a crash course in here's how much a historical soldier would have carried, and then when you factor in like a fantasy adventure like a D&D sort of thing, I think that where you have to carry like, you know, your own camping gear, which is a thing like apparently a lot of adventurers have. You're not going to be carrying that many weapons. You're going to have like maybe padded armor because it's comfortable, you know, like a sword, maybe like a pole arm or a missile weapon, and not maybe a helmet. Like you're not gonna see like fully armored paladins rocking about, wandering about through a dungeon because it's just too freaking heavy.
No, yeah, and like just the logistics of existing like that would be hellish.
Yeah,
Um, like kit that's easy to just throw on. Like before with the getting ambush thing, like things that you could just grab and it's effective
Yeah.
are amazing. When you've got if you have 1 5 minutes before easing sometimes because you can run, grab a helmet, and maybe scream at your friend who's already ready to quickly put your breastplate on you.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
like the sickest. Like, oh, this one thing on, and I'll grab a pike and
yeah. Well, it's also, I think that's why
and
swords
like yeah,
are super popular historically, because you can wear them. Like they're about as inconvenient as an umbrella. If you could also like just if you didn't have to use your hands to carry the umbrella. Whereas like
right.
I mean, I remember bringing my reenactment kit to university on like the bus and stuff, and fuck, like was when I or
Oh, it's garbage.
when I got like nominal influence on the SRC, like or just the union stuff. One of the first things I'm like, I'm using like what weird power I have to try and get like a full size locker for my club. It's like, yep, clubs need full size locker. I don't want to carry shit anymore. Um,
Yeah.
that was that was my perk. But yeah, no, you really it's like it's kind of a bit of a joke now with the internet, like video games give you like a sort of an exaggerated sense of how much you can carry, but it's really true. Like it's really true. Like you can't carry near as much as you think. Um,
Nowhere. Yeah. Even having a book on your hip that is somehow strapped to you or something is a bastard. Having like, and if it's like strapped through the spine, so it kind of like waves around as you run along, you try and run with that. Awful. Having one of those leather bottles of water on your hip, awful. Trying to get in and out of a tent with that, absolutely hellish. A sword on your hip when you go in and out of a tent, you're gonna wreck your tent. And you've got to be so careful every time.
it's a thing, yeah. Of course, the next question is how effective are bows and crossbows in mass combat? So I was watching like the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings the other week, and like their idea of bows seems to be that they think of them as like modern, like firearms and stuff, where they're really quick, they're really accurate. And you're sort of sitting there going, well, like, why does Aragon just not use his bow all the time if he can, like, and kill all the orcs from a distance? Like, why is he mainly using his sword other than just swords are cool? And yeah, it's not the like missile weapons are not anywhere near as like pre-modern. Like pre-modern missile weapons are nowhere near as effective. Like they're not, you know. I guess when I was like I don't know. I know with LARP has a lot of like a really wonderful variety of missile weapons that you can use. But remember when I was doing reenactment, we had these padded javelins that we'd throw and just there was a sort of
Stuck?
it stuck.
Like if it's stuck, it'd be like, oh, sick, that kind of worked. If you could get it to. But like the English longbowmen were like the ones that were famous for just making a mess of warfare with arrows, but they weren't elves taking pot shots at each other. It was just because they had a bunch of them and all let loose at once in a big arc and let just this rain of hell fall on people.
Yeah, and you hear all those descriptions and like blackening the sky with arrows. And I was actually watching a lecture on the Battle of Agincourt, and you get the sense that the archers aren't so much to kill the enemy as just annoy the crap out of them. Like, you like people,
yeah, and just free wounds.
Yeah, or even just get people to move. Like I remember in reenactment combat, like with the javelins, you get just one person with a javelin running around, and people want to kind of keep their distance a bit because it's a slow moving thing. It's like it's you can't throw them very fast. um, and it's a big thing, so it's a big obvious, object movement through the air, so it's pretty easy to dodge. But like people want to stay away and people want to keep an eye on where you are. So it's just you've got this thing that is annoying, but it's not particularly effective. Like there's a reason, I guess, like most of the killing in historical battles does come down to a sword, swords and axes and spears and stuff, because you know there's like a very very small sort of kill range for missile weapons, and then like if you're not in that, and then people just kind of stay out of that. I don't know if your experience with LARP is similar, because I know I imagine bows and crossbows and stuff might be a bit different, and I know, like LARP, they have like spells and throwing knives and stuff as well, so it's kind of different again.
Yeah, it's it's because they've got the potential damage that people's loss aversion kick in pretty hard. It's like, oh, you can make a decision that affects me from a greater distance than I can that affects you, and the best I can do is position in a way to inhibit such. That's a really power of a really skilled fighter that affects the ebb and flow of the whole fight, because you've got a bunch of people with a bit more loss aversion than usual. But also, if you're also thinking of like bows and crossbows and mass combat, it's if you only had a bunch of bows, you could do that Roman thing of stack all your shields and just rush at them. Let's go. And maybe some awful arrows that go to a small percentage of people getting a rush in. But with LARP, there's just a bit more, you can have a bit more teamwork about it and utilize that tool to augment the people that can stand their ground and tank, which can get real frustrating. Real frustrating.
Yeah, you see it in it was the things like just like my reenactment group, MACDAS, Macquarie University Dark Ages Society, were really big on javelins because they were cheap and easy to make, and because of the reenactment rules, they were safe enough that you could use them without much other protective gear. So it meant people could get into them on a limited budget with limited time. But a lot of other reenactment groups absolutely hated javelins because it was just really really frustrating for them. Like they're just like, they have to be constantly vigilant of these people running around, and it becomes this kind of area denial tool, I guess.
Yeah. No one wants to be the person that copped that one. So all of a sudden you got 6 people who all don't want to be the first person to drop.
Yeah.
Which is actually pretty funny, because it's like, well, if you all just rush them and one of you dropped, at least it's dealt with. But no one individual wants to be that person.
Yeah.
Which gives it a lot more effectiveness than on paper it should have.
Yeah, no. Very, which I think it's kind of that thing of it goes back to that, like the psychology of people as well, where like in a video game, like, a war game like Warhammer or something, if you've got a few archers that are close to being charged, you're just going to move your unit up and charge in.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, whereas when you've got like actual people who are a bit, like who are a bit more reversed, a bit like, oh god, I don't want to get shot by that. Then it's a bit.
Right, and and then you see.
Yeah. So it's got a sort of follow-up question, I guess.
How effective are bows and crossbows, really small numbers, say, in an adventuring party? This is great. This is the antithesis of the previous question. I love it.
Yeah.
So, in a very small group setting, I wouldn't want it with me. Maybe a crossbowman.
So you wouldn't. Sorry, you wouldn't want to be fighting an archer. You wouldn't want an archer on your
No.
side.
I wouldn't want one on my side.
Oh, why? Curious.
Because it's such a specific to battlefield where the rest of the people involved can give you that cover and utility. But if there was if there was 5 of us versus 5, let's say that, and it seemed kind of even, having 1 to 3 archers on your side would actually be more of a crutch, especially if the other side were able to either deny a hit with maybe a shield or something like that. Like, people can't let off arrows faster than someone with something like a shield should be able to get up to them. So, like, having 5 people with shields that can just go forwards, nope. Like, even if they somehow got one person, for the time that they're not actively drawn back and able to put someone in loss aversion or oblige a defense out of them, they are a null fighter until they can get another arrow on there.
Yeah, that's actually so. Just, I guess, something to kind of point out with that, when you're dealing with group combat, particularly like small numbers, like, you know, like 5-on-5 or whatever, like adventuring party versus adventuring party kind of numbers, losing one person is really major. Like, I remember in reenactment we do like little small skirmishes and stuff, because, you know, when you're a group of like, 10, 15 people, that's mostly what you can do. But it was always the case that, the battle would go until one person on one side died, at which point the numerical advantage of having 20% more people than the other side would just mean you steamroll them. Like, it was very rare that you got battle or like these skirmishes where there was like where it was like only 1 or 2 people left at the end. It was usually the sides square off, one person one side dies or is out of commission. Actually, the worst example I can think of, or funniest example, was had a battle where one person decided that they were going to flank, and we're starting quite far apart, and this one person just runs off, starts running around, and the other side just charged in and used their numerical advantage, and then one person who ran off. Just one person who ran off to try and flank couldn't get there in time, and all of a sudden, it was like 1v5, and they would. I think it was worse than it was like doing a 6-on-6. Yeah, that was. That was. That was. I mean, in hindsight, kind of funny. I was on the side that lost, so I was a bit frustrated at the time. But yeah, it's really interesting.
Because it seemed like a good idea.
Yeah, well, I think so. My experiences of missile weapons in small group combat is a bit different. Like, I don't mind it. I think having like someone with javelins is not too bad. This can be quite useful for just messing and breaking up formations. But there's a big difference, because someone with javelin and shield, like having 3 javelins and a shield, that person is still effective in close. Like, there's no point where they're not useful in a fight. Like, if they get rushed, they just use their javelin as a spear, and problem solved. Whereas I guess with an archer, like transitioning, even if you drop your bow, transitioning to another weapon is still time consuming. Like, even just even if you've got something you can get out quickly. So yeah, no, I get where you're coming from, which I guess is also for people who are looking for like ideas for what is a realistic equipment for an adventuring party to have. You might have a bow with you for special, for probably honestly for hunting more than for combat. But yeah, if you got like
as its own tool.
Yeah, like,
does the tool no longer effective? Which those seconds mean so much. so much.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I think a lot of people don't realize about I mean, sword fights, a lot of them are really quick. Like, yeah, I mean, not always. I mean, like, there's sort of this logic that movie fights are inaccurate because you'd never have a fight that would be drawn out to, would be drawn out long enough to be cinematic, which I don't agree with. Like, I've had fencing matches against people where it's been not minutes, but it's been like at least a while before someone's actually scored a decisive hit. But at the same time, like most sword fights are, 2-3 seconds. There's a period of circling and waiting, and then the actual period of action is very, very quick. And yeah, like I'm pretty quick at readying and firing a bow. Like when I do archery, I'm quicker than most people I shoot with. But even then, like, could not get 2 arrows off. I could not get 2 arrows off in the amount of time it takes for the average fencing exchange.
Yeah, right. And like if you missed your first shot in the time it takes you to get an arrow out, reposition, draw back and shoot, that's a lot of fun. That's a lot of movement. Add duress under it, and then someone who's attacking your friend and about to attack you, it's like you're stuck in a void.
Yeah, and so I think that's kind of. I mean, it must have been a huge thing when people realized that you could use a musket. Like you could use a musket as a melee weapon, and it was a decent melee weapon, and it didn't destroy the musket. Like I would not want to be I would not want to be parrying and like defending myself with a bow because it would ruin the bow, but like the bow would not protect me very long. Same with the crossbow, whereas that must have been a huge thing for people, just like, oh wow, we don't have to worry about getting
So
small.
have to separate them.
Yeah.
They can actually, massive difference.
Yeah. So we've got a question from David. Yep. How much HEMA can you put into a street fight when things start getting emotional?
Restricted. All right. Here's a gremlin. Just for the sake of stream, David Gresham's actually my best mate.
Yeah, it was, we actually had this thing where just like, let's just get people to ask like ridiculous questions just so that, because I know there's going to be a whole bunch of people out there who are really wondering, like feeling a bit self-conscious about asking questions. We're like, all right, if we get people asking like really just ridiculous questions, you're never going to ask worse questions than like Mosh's friends. So just go for it. Yeah, like
I
mean, I've heard a lot of HEMA people say
You go.
like pub brawls and stuff where they're just like, yeah, being hit in the face, like having something come at my face and learning not to flinch has meant that I could stay calm. And then I think it was actually Steve Hand from down in Tasmania. He got in a pub. He was telling me about a pub fight he got in where he just moved, like he just used control of distance to not get hit by this guy swing at him, and then just waited for the guy to overcommit, and then as soon as the guy overcommitted, he just grabbed onto him and held onto him. Which, like, Steve Hand is a big dude. Used to be a power lifter as well.
Yeah.
According to legend, he actually could knit chainmail with a big guy. So yeah, he gets a hold of someone, they're not getting out. But yeah, like that kind of like emotional. I guess as an emotional thing, like being able to stay calm while being hit in the face is really helpful. And then like from a self-defense perspective, just being like, right, I can just not be hit until I can physically hold on to the person until they realize that continuing to fight is a bad idea. Like, yeah, I mean, having worked in the legal sector, I'd much rather just be able to grab and hold on to someone than get in a fray charge. So yeah, like there's that, like it's sort of, it does have transferable skills, but I guess kind of, and it is a big thing. It is, I remember going from doing Taekwondo, which was non-contact, to first to HEMA and then to boxing. And when I went into boxing, I kind of knew how to throw a punch none of my defenses worked. Like none of the Taekwondo defenses worked. Not because the technique wasn't a viable technique, but because I'd never done it at proper distance. Like no one ever actually tried to punch me. They tried to punch in front of me. So you can't learn to defend an attack that's not coming at you. It's like the technique for that is completely different. And so yeah, so in boxing, like I was able to get like box at a reasonable pace and still be calm, like not lose my shit and try and take a person's head off. And I had like control of distance and I knew how to throw a punch. So I did okay. Like I didn't. I'm not saying I stepped into ring, one or anything. I like got my ass handed to me, but like just being able to stay calm when like having stuff come at your face, like particularly come at your face, and being like, okay, well, I've been injured before. I can get injured again. It's fine. Like I'm having a bit of injury is have like that's a really really valuable thing. And I think in a street fight, like, well, being able to stay calm is a huge thing. So yeah, that's my take on the question.
Yeah. The other take of it that I would do would be like more the fantasy stuff of it. Like I've also got not nice experiences with violence, but with the how much HEMA can you put in a street fight, you feel big cuts want to happen. For one, like when like in a LARP context, big cuts want to kind of happen because you're just suddenly doing whatever you can before you start pulling your head into position. You're like, and now I'll fence properly in this wildly sudden environment. And things like the angry half sword happens because you're so close to the person, or
Angry
so it's like it was stuff that we usually have for battlefields. That was like we got to just exist in this town that was quite violent. David, the person who's asked this question, got attacked for X reason, and
probably
yeah, that's a whole other thing. But he got attacked by a group of people, and I was absolutely venomous because how dare they do that? And I just start cutting people. I got hit in the back. I got dropped down. My mate, who's a healer, ran up and grabbed me, fixed me up. And suddenly, one of them's still there next to the beer garden and out the front of the tavern. He's up against the railing, and it's shit. Like, you guys attacked my friends. I asked him, why did you do it? And he comes up with these wishy-washy things. And it's that, I have a decision to make. I let you be, and then my friends may still get attacked. Or I make a decision of, I'm sorry, friend, you're just at the wrong place at the wrong time. As I've grabbed halfway down my flamberge and just started stabbing him in the chest and shouting at him, how dare you? And the poor guy's face just like, we were in the middle of talking and there I am just mauling him like, how dare you? Right? Because it's like, well, yeah, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, bud. Sorry. And like, that wasn't, I poked him a bunch. That wasn't, I started cutting him wildly where maybe it wouldn't have hurt him. It was, anything that is in your right hand, I am also going to be able to deal with by doing this. As I'm just stabbing you into half sorting shows up in a laugh because sick lever, but you're not going to do it unless you cover that distance. And if you can encroach upon their distance without there being any violence and then suddenly use it, it makes a lot of sense. If you goof up your good fencing and then go in closer and then have to do it, it also makes sense. Just like, cool, that's straight out of the books. Stab him while holding the blade and going, how dare you?
Yeah, just get in really aggressive. Yeah. So, I remember actually when I first started doing submission wrestling, I was still doing a lot of yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what's actually getting broadcast because we're both fuzzing in and out, so I'm just doing my best. But I remember when I first started doing submission wrestling, I was doing a lot of HEMA, and it was a big thing for HEMA back in the day that grappling was part of sword fighting. Especially when people were doing like medieval stuff, and it was like, oh, there's grappling, there's dirty fighting, whatever. Um, but like most people would do when they got close is they just grab tense their entire body and just push. And there's this like and that got you through. It got you through so. It got a lot of people through so
Yeah.
much. There's actually his guy never actually got to train with him, but he was part of the same club for a little bit. Who was he was a cop, and whenever he like there's a lot of stuff he learned on the job, so to speak, where about grappling, where he just grab onto someone, basically tense his body, and then fall in a direction. Um, and then basically just use the fact and then just do whatever he could to get on top and just use the fact that he was a big guy to sort it out. But yeah, it's like that kind of just simple do a thing aggressively. It
Yeah.
makes such a huge difference. I guess it's the other thing. I saw a little bit of this when I was doing reenactment, where when you're in a situation where it's not planned, it's not measured, you're not starting at like engagement distance, or you're like walking up to the person. When you're like, it is a bit spontaneous. Like there's so much less you can do in terms of finesse and in terms of technique. I don't know, is that like your experience as well? Like you just find that simple aggressive tends to get you by when it's not a duel.
Yeah. Like having initiative gives you a lot of it. And if you're suddenly spontaneously fighting someone who really knows what they're doing,
Mm.
why? Like, why are you? That sounds horrific and sounds like it will suddenly turn into a weird bull in quotation marks because it'll
Mm.
actually have the layers and depth of two educated people trying to bash each other, hopefully. And
Hopefully,
like,
yeah.
right? And if they can't, if you try and do anything more complicated, if they can't deal with first intention, you keep doing first intention until the thing's sorted. If they can deal with first intention, you get to finally play. And I don't want to have to finally play out the front of Crown. Um,
Yeah. So then it becomes this thing, and it's like, you know, well, I feel like that's very much like when you're fighting someone who you're unfamiliar, like in a dueling sort of context, like your traditional kind of HEMA context, uh, HEMA historical European martial arts. I just realized there's probably a bunch of people here who've come from like a gaming or like a fantasy fiction background who don't who might not know a lot of terms, but HEMA is historical European martial arts, reconstructing historical fighting from sources, but tends to focus very, very much on one-on-one combat, like a dueling kind of combat. But I find like even when you're facing someone who's completely unfamiliar, they do an unfamiliar system, you've never faced them as a person before, especially if they've got like an unfamiliar weapon, um, everything just turns into first intention, like just what simple effective thing can you throw at them, can you line up and throw, and then occasionally you get more detailed fencing from there. Like I used to when I was
yeah, and
fighting.
then there's reconnaissance in it and everything like that.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, and then you just get, and then I found actually when I was fencing a lot of people who did very, very different systems, I was just basically attacking the sword arm constantly, just because I found that like it landed a lot more than it should. And when it didn't land and people started like trying to throw like a return attack or a pulse from there, they that's what forced them to fence the way I wanted to fence. So it was yeah, it was it was kind of similar in that sense of just do a simple thing and throw like just do a simple thing and over and over again and be good at it. All right, so
All right.
Probably moved on. So this is more of a comment, but I think it's kind of just a cool one. Where it's like having sparred people with spears, with throwing that's allowed, with backup weapons is interesting. How much Maryland's basic tactics change when spears are thrown. Right, cool. Just wanted to check that was the full comment. Yeah, and I found the same thing when I was doing reenactment. Like being able to throw a weapon. People don't like. There's this danger zone just on the edge of engagement distance, like where you're not quite close enough to hit someone whilst taking like on a lunge or like a short step, or like a short passing step. But you're still close enough that if they throw, you're going to have a lot of trouble dealing with the attack. And it really it does mess with people a lot. Like most people I actually want to hit back. And then every so often you get someone who's just like, no, I just got to get through that distance as quick as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my experience of doing not a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of experience of scenario fighting. But yeah, it's still a bit.
No, and that's completely it. It's the potential damage within a single tempo or as fast as you can react. That range has just increased exponentially. So all of a sudden the measure and spacing is just different. There is potential damage all the way out there. And you got to kind of gamble on whether they can hit you from back there or whether they can hit you closer. And let's go. Let's see how this goes.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah, and once it's thrown, it's like, oh, we're now where we're at. Let's go. Who's got advantage now?
Yeah. Well, the other thing as well I found was you throw and then you've got like you're not out of the game, because if you got you usually do this with spear and shield, but like no one with just a single weapon throws their weapon. But you throw and then you're like, and then there's this moment when the other person's rushing on you because they know that they can at the very least get a free shot in. I didn't do a lot of this. I did I've only done a very small amount. Most of my experience with sword fighting is that dueling one-on-one, similar weapon. Thankfully not similar system. I've done a lot of fencing across people who do very different systems to me. But yeah, just little bits of this sort of, scenario, you've got backup weapons. That's it. That's the thing. There's this point where people just rush you. And I think one of the times I did it, I found I'd throw and people would rush. And I just knowing how to wrestle was such a useful skill in that environment. You're like, all right, I've got someone on top of me. I can grab them. I can hold them. I can control them until I can get my own weapon out, or I can control them until I can get hold of their weapon.
Yeah.
It was interesting because there's a lot of people that I fence with regularly learned that they didn't want to get close to me. It was the funniest thing. There's a point where I was the only one who did any practical unarmed martial arts, and then people learned very quickly that I could could probably out grapple them or outbox them, and then a bunch of people I fenced with started doing wrestling and very quickly got better at it than me. And then some of the people I was doing wrestling with started coming to fencing, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, there's now a whole chunk of people who could just tie me in knots. So this is, yeah, yeah. It was, but that kind of throwing weapons, having that, and having being able to throw a spear and shield and then pull out a sword it's really changes things. It's nuts. Right, cool. So we're moving into I've got some questions about dragons. So
yes.
So this is one that Jacob asked a few days ago, and and so I ended up putting a lot of research into this. But I actually found there's a historical account of fighting a dragon. Dead set. I'm not not something. So this is the sagas of the Icelanders, or sagas of the warrior poets, which is Icelandic sagas were a series of poems from the end of the Viking Age. So we're talking kind of 11th century ish. Also, um, that were then preserved in Iceland and were written down. It was over 100, I think, close to 200 years later. But thankfully, being poetry, a lot of the meaning is actually preserved because it's very, very hard to change the words in a poem without losing the rhythm and the meter and the alliteration and stuff like that. And we know from linguistics that a lot of these were in the same language that was used 200 years before. So reasonably cool. But to bust open, and I just want to show my bookmark even has a dragon and vandalism. Gnomes is actually the artist who designed this, and she's cool, but still vandalism. But yeah, so I thought this is from the saga of Bjorn, champion of the Hidardal people, who was a Viking warrior who started in Norway, went to what is now Russia, and fought on behalf of the Norwegian king against the Varangians, who are a people who are mostly based around what is now Kiev in the Ukraine and also into Russia. And then decided he was going to go and become set up a farm in Iceland. But as part of his journey, and I thought I'd read this out. The next summer, Bjorn went west to England and won much esteem there. He stayed for 2 years with King Canute the Great. It happened, when Bjorn was accompanying the king and sailing with his company in southern seas, that a dragon flew over the king's company and attacked them and tried to snatch one of the men. Bjorn was standing nearby covered the man with his shield, but the dragon clawed almost through it. Bjorn then gripped the dragon's tail with one hand, while with the other hand struck it behind the wings, and the dragon was severed and fell down dead. The king gave Bjorn a large sum of money and a fine longship. With this, he sailed to Denmark. So yeah, there is a historical account. There is a historical account of Funny Green. I should be clear. The Icelandic saga is a bit interesting because a lot of Canute was an actual king of England, or actually England, a chunk of Denmark, and also Norway. And there's a bunch of stuff described in the sagas that we know from other sources happened, and there's a bunch of things that are actually verified in the archaeological record. But there's also stuff there's a point where people are just like, oh, we're going to go talk to this guy who lives out kind of on the border between the wilderness and settled farmland, because he knows a heap about magic because he's like a quarter giant. And there's all this stuff, or there's these kind of fantastic elements as well. And this was describing a people for whom you might not necessarily directly have experienced magic, but it was very believable that a couple of villages over there was like a giant or a dragon or something like that. So yeah, there's a historical account of a dragon. And so I guess to spiral back to why I was researching this for Jacob's question is how the specifics of this really depend on the type of dragon. So I actually did some research into dragons because I am that nerdy. And so to give you a sense, so there's sort of, in terms of depictions, there's a couple of types of dragons commonly depicted. So there's this sort of stained glass image you see of St. George and the dragon. I was actually trying to find, a lot of these are quite common. My school chapel actually had a stained glass that was quite similar to this one here. We've got we've got a dragon that's about the size of a dog, which for a flying creature is actually quite realistic, except that the wings would have to be 4 times the size of that.
For it to actually,
a big pun, sorry.
For it to actually be able to fly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and similar things here. So you've got this again, dragon about the size of a dog, and part of it as well is the banner for this event is is actually a depiction of St. George. And then so if your dragon is about the size of a dog, how you deal with it is if it's different to, say, your a common depiction of a dragon, in this case as depicted in the game Draken Order of the Flame, which is one of my favorite 90s games, where the dragon is about the size of a horse, but with much, but bigger because of the wings and tail, which then, is different again to how you deal with the dragon the size of Smaug from the Hobbit films, so depicted here on his hoard, or alternatively here with Stephen Colbert for scale. So, yeah, this sort of,
No thanks.
So I'm like, okay, this is a bit. There's a bit of a a question here of like, well, what kind of dragon? So I'm like, all right, well, how big could a dragon reasonably be? And so I looked at like what the largest real flying creatures were, and so the biggest ever bird is the Argentavis, which is kind of like an ancestor of the condor, which is depicted here. We've got like a human for scale, also the world's largest dragonfly, and they would have weighed somewhere between 70 and 80 kilos, it's estimated. So about the size of a small, or about the size of a medium, or about the weight of a medium-sized person, but with what's this, like like a 6 meter wingspan. Then you've then got like a Quetzalcoatlus, a proper dinosaur, which is significantly larger and probably, I think some of them, it's estimated, or the biggest estimate for their weight is about 250 kilos. So, probably more similar. Or to get a better sense of size, this is the Argentavis. Here, scaled next to a woman with interesting taste in pants. Idiot size, but you think about something this size that can also breathe fire. I mean, this bird would be fucking terrifying if it attacked you. Yeah. Imagining something that could also breathe fire that was this size would actually be very, very scary for a single person to face. And then when you get to the Quetzalcoatlus here, next to Benedict Cumberbatch portraying Sherlock on the BBC for scale. Yeah, I actually think if you wanted to choose a real, an existing creature to model a dragon after, I actually think this would be a good bet, because they could walk around on all fours, and they're 5 meters tall and freaking terrifying. And you can see.
Yeah, I don't want to see that in real life.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, they could have really friendly personalities. They could be one of those animals that's just so that they don't actually have to worry about much. So that they're really friendly. But they probably weren't.
I had horses like that, and they'd still step on your foot and break it.
Yeah, fair. But yeah, so that was kind of my, okay, well, what kind of dragon are we talking? And so I'm like, all right, well, in terms of fortifications, to get back to Jacob's question, it depends. I guess a lot of these things, it really depends. But if the dragon is a wild animal, if it's like a bear or something, fortifications aren't really going to be much of an issue, because most predatory animals either learn to stay away from humans or go extinct. Humans are just horrifying if you're not a human. And things
if you are a human, they're still horrifying.
Yeah, true. But yeah, you look at the only place in the world where there's megafauna today is Africa, because African megafauna had time to evolve, and also India, but megafauna in India and Southeast Asia is descended of African megafauna that evolved with humans, and so kind of learnt to mostly adapt. But yeah, most places in the world, like Australia, the Americas, Europe, humans rock up, and a few hundred years later, there's no megafauna. So yeah, as a wild animal, dragons as a wild animal probably would go extinct well before the Middle Ages, because humans. But let's imagine that they're maybe domesticatable, so they survived, or to some degree intelligent. Then yeah, you've got a different kind of situation. You've got in terms of building a fortification for dealing with dragons trained for warfare. Um, you've got country problems. One is the flight, and the other is the fire. Because I guess to draw a historical parallel, during the late Western Roman Empire, like when they were at war with the Sassanid Persians, one of the siege tactics used on both sides was they try and tunnel under the walls, and because the walls of like Roman and Sassanid forts, like architecture hadn't developed to the point where they could make the walls entirely out of stones, needed like a wooden frame or wooden support. So what you do is you go along and try and like set aside the wooden bits of the fortification, set them on fire so that the whole thing would collapse. Although I suspect that if you had dragons in warfare, when it came to fortification, you get keystones, like keystones a lot sooner. So keystones is where the stones all lock into place and support each other, so you don't actually need any wood or any other materials as a frame or as a support. Hugely important in the development of cathedrals. This is just turned into a history talk, but yeah. So so you'd definitely you'd have like fully stone fortifications much sooner. You'd probably, I guess that comes down to the question of like, how would you actually deal with a dragon at all? Because you've got this thing that flies, even if it's just gliding, it's still fairly quick. And as we're sort of talking about before with like missile weapons, they're not fast enough, they're not accurate enough, they're not like shooting something like that down would be very, very difficult. Like the only way to really do it would just be to pump an area full of missiles. So yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of fortifications, you'd probably see a much greater emphasis on archers, I guess. Also, like on like things like ballistas and siege weapons mounted on towers and stuff, just so that you've got a lot of missile fire you can sort of use to shoot the dragon down before it gets to you. Yeah, like probably. I guess maybe things like slingers or something like that. Or I've actually seen. I tried to track an image of these down, but I swear years ago I saw a historical example of a crossbow that was designed to shoot stones. So it had like a sling on the string, and you could retract it, lock it in place, put a stone in it, would shoot a stone. And I was kind of imagining, well, if you scaled something like that up to a ballista, so you've got like a large, essentially a giant crossbow, or like a scorpion, like a torsion crossbow, and you can put like a bundle of rocks, like you just have bags of rocks you just tip in and then fire. If you've got a bunch of those, you could probably shoot enough into you shoot enough sort of stones into the air to at the very least deter a dragon really of any size, or any size that could realistically fly. Like your Smaug type dragon probably wouldn't care. Just a creature that size, the hide and the muscle and everything would be too thick that it would be very, very hard to hurt with anything. That was in the Hobbit.
There's also another thing that came to mind, which is actually would be a later stage interaction of it. I think, with the assumption that humans like overcoming problems, structures that could support. Yeah, I saw Harrison's comment and made me smile. Like, yes.
Yes. I'll just look it up.
Structures that could suddenly support hundreds of kilo on them out of nowhere, because like those big things, those 6 meter tall dinosaurs that you had as like a real world example of a dragon, if that is around 250 kilo, there's a lot of structures that were not made to suddenly have 250 kilo perched upon them. Right? And like just getting a couple of those things to just go land on someone's tent. That's free, right? You land on that bridge that is not built for that to suddenly have an extra 250 kilo on it.
A 250 kilo that doesn't mind, like that can fly away or that
Oh,
doesn't mind falling. Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
Like a whole lot of roof technology would be completely different.
Mm. Well, I resubmit my comment about keystones. Like historically, I
Yeah,
will. They were used for monumental architecture, like they were used to make giant cathedrals. Um, you know, um, but like or like mosques as well. Actually, I think they were originally for mosques. Like a lot of the reason why so many mosques have domes is because it wasn't until you had that technology, that ability to lock stones together, that you could actually make a dome on a thing. So it was just this cool, fancy thing that people like, hey, check me out, I've got a dome. Ain't no buildings got domes around here. So you probably get that. Yeah, you get that a lot sooner. And you probably also, but it'd also be easier to. It'd be a lot easier to get people experimenting and wanting to do it, because if you've got like a core of dragon riders, um, you're going to need buildings to house them in, and you're going to need buildings that they can launch from. And it might actually, I mean, it might be a thing as well with fortifications in a medieval world that, yeah, sure, you're going to be attacked by dragons, so you need strong fortifications and like archer emplacements and things like that to deal with them. But you also, I mean, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of examples through history where the way you counter something is to throw that thing, is to just to have that thing sort of be thrown back at it. Like as in Spain during the Conquista, so the wars where the Christian Spanish drove out like Muslim rulers. They had cavalry that like cavalry with javelins, whose job was to harass on both sides. But what would usually happen is the way you countered that, the way you dealt with these cavalry who just come along and threaten everyone with javelins and ride off again, was you sent out your own to basically drive them off. And as long as both sides had them, the two cavalry would just be riding around like messing with each other so the battle could commence without having to worry about them. So that might be a solution, is just go, right, well, it's easier for us we can have a fortification, would just need to house dragons, and anyone who couldn't house dragons in their fortification would very, very quickly be conquered by people who could bring dragons to them. So
Harry's follow-up comment was something that I was going to touch on as well. Just if you wanted to put that up.
Yeah, the target.
No, the next one.
Okay, yep. Oh, cool. Yeah, we've gotten into dragon territory. Was it so? The one true application of dragons versus forts is ferrying troops past the walls, castles, to keep people out. Air cav ignores walls. Yeah.
Right, like to what end are big walls all of a sudden?
Yeah, well, I guess I mean, it might become more like modern fortifications are less about physically like having a physical barrier, and more about housing weapons that can outreach and outpower anything that a person could, or that an army could easily move to attack your fortifications. So yeah, it might be that fortifications actually end up being about providing vantage points for archers or like missile troops and things like that. Like their main role is actually, or even to provide cover for them as well. As they're basically just providing enough like missile support to keep anything from flying in. But I guess then as well, you've got the problem as well. You also have, if you're defending like a walled city or something like that, it's very difficult particularly with pre-modern missile weapons, because like the effective like the accurate range of a bow is not that long. Like it's really not. Like I think it's like something like 150 meters is considered like the end, like long range for a bow. Like you're not going to hit very much there unless you're a very good shot, or there's just a lot of you. So yeah, you sort of probably one of the big things you'd see actually with fortifications is that you wouldn't fortify cities. You wouldn't have walled cities. You'd have to have smaller forts where they can actually be covered by missile fire in order to just stop people flying over the walls.
Yeah. Are you able to scroll down on the chat? Because for whatever reason, it's not letting me. There were a couple much earlier that were like, oh yeah, we could come back to that.
Yeah. So there's another dragon question that we got. I think we'll just do all the dragon stuff now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a dragon has a mate in the in the mountain lair in the north. Has been terrorizing the local countryside. How do you deal with it? It's
Hobbits.
hobbits. Yeah.
They figure things out better.
Yeah. Also, my first thought was like, why has the dragon got the maid? Like, if a dragon is smart enough to engage in kidnapping, then the dragon probably has something they want. I know. I just kind of I like the idea. This is why my brain goes like my background, my academic background is in history and politics. So my brain just goes, well, why is the dragon kidnapping the maid? Like, is it like
to what end?
Yeah. Well, it's like in the 100 Years' War, a big thing that the English would do is basically just go around terrorizing the countryside as a way of destabilizing France, and also like particularly in ancient Greece, like kidnapping people's daughters, like kidnapping princesses was a big political thing because if you could kidnap a princess, you could say to her father, your line is now in jeopardy, or to her husband or whatever. So yeah, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, is this dragon very politically motivated? Is this something where we need to negotiate? I guess in terms of dealing, like physically dealing, let's just say like the dragon is just, its political goals are really unsavory. Just well, it believes in like strong borders or something. So we just have to kind of go and deal with it. I mean, the way humans traditionally deal with megafauna, with large creatures, is ambush. Is like you don't. I mean, if the lair is up in the mountains, attacking it with an army is going to be very difficult, especially and especially if it's like so you're going to need a small group of people. So yeah, it'd be a case of sort of sneak in, observe the dragon, like watch. I mean, I think I'd actually be looking for, in terms of dealing with a dragon, is I'd actually be looking for when the countryside starts to catch fire, and that's when you go in and you wait in its lair. So it's sort of probably a bit mercenary, but kind of going, okay, if things start catching fire, there's a good chance the dragon's not home, and the place it would least expect to be attacked is in its lair. So that's where you sort of sneak in,
Right, like you start going into hunting and reconnaissance to try and figure out what'll actually even hurt it. And there's all the problem solving before you actually do something.
Yeah, like it's sort of that's a lot. Like that's a lot of most battles are logistics. I mean, I remember as the first Armidale I went to. Like Armidale is a big medieval reenactment event that happens every 2 years. That's really cool and people should go. First one, I was getting over a breakup, so I was just emotionally exhausted. I didn't want to do anything, and so I just wanted to drink mead and talk to people about history. But I ended up, rather than being in any of the big battles, I just ended up watching them. And the same thing happened over and over again. There was the two sides would line up. It was all these different groups from all around Australia, and then NVG, which is New Varangian Guard, who are one of the bigger groups in Australia, and probably one of the more dedicated groups as well. Like they're pretty hardcore. They all got together, and they were capable of marching and maneuvering together. Whereas the other side, which was just made up of a hodgepodge of groups, wasn't. Like there was just a mass of people who were just like who could walk forward. They could walk forward in formation stuff, but getting them to coordinate was really difficult. And And the same thing happened. The NVG would split off, would flank around, and one of two things would happen. Either they'd successfully get around the flank and just come in from the side and kill everyone, or the line would break because people would turn to try and face them without much coordination. At which point, the main force would start attacking wherever the break was. And the same thing just happened over and over again, and it didn't really matter what happened because it didn't really matter what else happened because there was just one group of people who were more coordinated. I guess that's the thing I'd be looking for in terms of dealing with a dragon. Would just be like, right, it's one big enemy. Let's just go and let's just find a way to slit its throat in its sleep. I'm not a particularly brave person generally, but I'm certainly not brave enough to fight a dragon.
Competitive.
Yeah. So yeah, that'd be kind of the thing is, sneak in, slit its throat when it sleeps, poison its food, just ambush it on its way in. I guess the other thing as well is if I was going to fight a dragon, I'd want to do it in a cave, or I'd want to do it in a confined space where it can't fly. Because that's a huge, if the dragon can fly, it can pick the terms.
What are you planning on doing?
Yeah, I was I can shoot at it a bit, but you shoot at it, if that doesn't take it out, you're gone. It's just fire and talons and stuff. So don't fight dragons directly. If you're an adventuring party, just don't. Actually, I did a role play once.
Not dying is sick.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of not dying. I actually did a role playing game once where the party was meant to kill a dragon, and we decided it was the technology was sort of golden age of piracy-ish kind of level. So there's muskets and cannons and stuff. And the way we ended up killing the dragon was we just dragged a light cannon up, waited, and when the dragon came along, shot it with a cannon. So I was just
right. Superior firepower against an unaware enemy is just yes, that's the golden ticket. Let's go.
Yeah. No, just shoot it from close range. It's actually one of the other things that annoyed me about. One of the things I point out about season 8 of Game of Thrones was the Lannisters get ballistas, and there's one time that they actually do anything where the dragon just gets shot out of nowhere, and there's no way a ballista would be that accurate. The chances of actually pulling it off. Yeah, it's not even then. Just no. You a lot of them at closer range, at just out of flame range. Yeah, that's going to work, but so far away that the dragon rider hasn't even noticed the fleet of ships. No.
So we have one that's probably the good one to finish on for the dragons, which is the most recent one.
Okay. Oh yeah. What's the logistics?
Yeah, I love this.
Yeah.
Yeah, logistics.
What's the thing is so one of the last of the questions from before, the pre-questions that I haven't actually posted yet, was about how monsters affect battlefields. And there's a big thing with that with war elephants is the logistics of them. Carthage at its height could only muster it was 100 or so. It was only a few hundred war elephants, and in any the way the Romans end up dealing with them is just swarming them, because the Carthaginians couldn't have enough elephants that you could just send a whole heap of elephants in to destroy a line, and so they would always be outnumbered, because you also couldn't have elephants close to your own infantry in case they went they got injured by an arrow or something and just rampaged.
Crack the shits, which I don't blame them.
Yeah,
I would.
Yeah, so I was an elephant. I'd just be cracking the shits constantly. But yeah, so we got with logistics question, I don't know what the caloric intake of a predator that size would be. I imagine that, like, particularly with like the larger kind of, Quetzalcoatlus sized dragon, that would be 200 to 250 kilos of flying animals. Well, like birds require a lot more energy than a ground dwelling creature of their size, because flying is really energy intensive. Um, yeah, that would like
That would be a nightmare. And you'd have almost the same trade-off as the full plate knights or just people with muskets. Like,
yeah,
is it actually worth it at this point?
yeah. Because I mean, to feel like more than to feel like double digits of dragons, you'd probably need to have a herd of cattle coming, like, following your army, in order to do it. Although the way I would get around it, if I was like a medieval fantasy lord, who can have a dragon at, can have that dragon every. Actually, this, going back to the fortification question, the dragon, having dragons in one place where you can bring food to, much easier than moving them. So it might be with dragons that very rarely are forts attacked by dragons, but they're often defended by them. And because you can have more dragons in a fort where you can just bring food to them, it's never worth actually bringing your dragons in offensively, because they'll always be outnumbered.
The guard dogs ever.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think the way I get around the issue of just dragons needing to eat is you wouldn't use them as like a battlefield force necessarily. You'd use them for raiding and reconnaissance and things like that. You'd send them out to attack, farms of a rival kingdom, or like the enemy's baggage train or something, because then there's livestock, or horses in the case of moving armies. You probably wouldn't want to feed your dragons people. You don't want them to get a taste for people. Go badly, but yeah, using them as using them for raiding and harassing, and going out, and if you've got an enemy that's say you've got an enemy that's going to come and invade you, going out and destroying the farmland between them and you, preferably the farmland that is not the farmland you own, is going to be very, very effective. And it means that you can kind of you can go out and find food for the dragon, and it also means that you can send small groups of them. And dragons are really, really good for that. Anything that can fly would be really good for that, because you can move consistently. You don't have to worry about forests or roads or anything like that. And you can just, you can scout out from the air where you're going to attack, go down, attack it, feed, the dragon can eat whatever it wants, whatever, livestock is there, and then you can just fuck off. And and also with before modern communication, it would be really hard to deal with that. One of the things that gave the Vikings a decisive advantage was their dragon ships, in the sense that they could just move really quickly, and just, if something was fortified, they just wouldn't bother half the time. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, did not get raided by the Vikings because their cities were too fortified. And I think there's a brief problem, but mostly what they did is they just built fortified bridges across rivers, so that they could control which ships came in and out. And just Vikings lost their advantage and just decided to go for Western Europe, which was a lot weaker at the time.
I just had another point just pop into my head, which was purely how fast you could get communications to different groups would be disgusting, and would have revolutionized warfare something fierce.
Yeah, that coordination.
Right. Just boom.
Yeah. I actually got it. Sorry. I really should have read that question before posting it. So considering the fact that Dragon Rider is the most useful high priority communication, what's the chance that they end up spreading time carrying gentle woodcuts to potential brides? So we got medieval dick pics. This is great.
Right, that's the meta of dragons.
Yeah. Oh.
We're gonna go back to political uses.
I mean, yeah, I fully agree that the dragons would probably be more like their biggest uses would be reconnaissance and communication, because particularly like, I mean, hot air balloons in the American Civil War and after, because they were used just for reconnaissance, like you just send a balloon up and you could see for miles. That was massive. And it was
it would have been.
Yeah, and it actually is it's something European. There's a lot of European observers who went over to the American Civil War to observe on both sides, because they realized very, very quickly that the fact that both sides of America were kind of making shit up as they went along when it came to warfare, like they didn't have the same experience of standing armies and musket lines and stuff, meant that they were very creative. They're being very, very creative in an era where there's all these new technologies. They were just like hot air balloons with a shit. Like everyone's like, wow. And, right up until airplanes, really, which turned out to be even better. But yeah, no, I think definitely carrying messages. I kind of like it in more like a pre, like the idea of carrying dick pics in like a pre printing press world. Where you've got like these illuminated manuscript versions of dick pics or something, just some poor monk somewhere, some poor scribe has just sent has just had to sit there and basically make paint ink sketch however many dick pics on parchment, and yeah, it was
that'd be glorious. That is it.
So it's actually over the and so you've got Harrison's comment. The Franco-Prussian War was the first time military aircraft was ever shot down. Yeah, well, must be.
Which, I don't want someone up there seeing what I'm doing. That's valuable information that stops it being like an advantage.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well,
right, range and flight time of dragons. Sorry, that was the next thing you said.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the airspeed velocity of a dragon, is an African or a European dragon, just yeah. Oh, yeah, no problem. I mean, I guess that goes back to what I was saying about like looking at real life creatures of that size, like the Quetzalcoatlus and the I forgot the name of the giant bird. Which is sad because I actually spent more time researching the bird, and I'm like, it only dawned on me today that I should see if there were any dinosaurs that were bigger. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I should be looking into. But yeah, the I guess you look at the speed of those creatures, how fast they can be, and or how fast it's estimated they can be. But even then, in historical travel, sending something by river was faster than sending something over land, and sending something by sea was faster again, because by river you didn't have to deal with obstacles. You could go continuously. You just get in a boat and the boat just keeps going. And even if the boat's not moving faster, not that much faster than a person can walk, or even at the same speed as a person can walk, it doesn't have to rest. It doesn't have to stop. It doesn't have to work, maneuver its way through forests or anything like that. So it ends up being a lot quicker. And also you can carry a lot more, which is why most major cities in Europe and really everywhere in the world are on rivers. Like inland cities are on rivers. We know Australia's a little bit of an exception to that, except that our two major cities are both coastal. So yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I guess you kind of have to. That is something you could reasonably guesstimate, or if you're wanting detail by looking at um, like busting out sort of the estimates of the large flying dinosaurs and how well they go. But that was beyond the scope of my research for this. Um, so yeah, so we've got another question here to hopefully round out our dragon question.
Yeah, this is where it all comes down to. Always logistics.
Yeah, what most battles
Like,
are about.
yeah, that's like as much as we can talk about like what techniques are the best in each situation, getting there is actually the most fucked part, and like that's why I love that it keeps kind of digressing towards it.
Yeah,
And that's like
yeah,
the thing that, especially with like LARPs and big battle things, it really is what you can bring to the field. Like
mm,
there's the funny interaction of for the battle game that I do every Friday, there's a couple hundred people who play, but people don't bring tanks every week because that would be garbage and you'd have to bring your trailer and make an entire like plywood and uh pine tank every
like
Friday and put it together and pack it up. Like it's not going to happen. But when you've got a
yeah.
whole week to fuck around with this big thing you can cart around
So, but when you say tank, do you mean like?
and drive around and shoot people. Yeah, yeah, I'll show you. Give me a second. I think I've got a photo on here. It says this really cool tank, and it's
Oh yeah,
just
you got to
it's
show us.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dude.
All
Okay.
right.
I have.
I'm going to share my screen.
Yep. So cool. I'll be ready to.
Let's go to window. Are you able to see it?
I I
Yeah.
will say I will. All right. As soon as it comes up, I will click. So.
No, I want this one. Share. There we go.
All right.
There we go. Yeah, right.
Fuck.
But the logistics of just that is hot garbage.
Yeah. Fuck. Like.
Right, and that thing like in the confines of the game, if it moves healed or whatever, and has you get shot by the cannon out the top, shot by a cannon, therefore you die and need to get healed. Those little shields on the side can open up, and the people in there can shoot at your rifles. Like that thing's a wild ride, and I've fought against it and with it a bunch. And I love like the interactions it causes.
Yeah. That's amazing. I guess it kind of leads into a next question as well, like in terms of in terms of questions. So, how would large monsters change warfare? Because I think, like, is it a thing with LARP that there's actually like monsters? Like, I'll take that as a
Let's
yes.
go. The Empire Rhino is the funniest thing. I love it. They impact it greatly because like sometimes they'll have to have like a designated weak zone, so all of a sudden its hitbox is tiny, but its potential damage is huge. A lot of the time they make them that if it touches you, you get killed in quotation marks. So like that's a blast to have to deal with. Where was the other lot? So give me a second.
Monster. Holy shit!
And this is where it like this one in particular. This was in Victoria, Melbourne for Sawcraft. This was made by one of the groups that used to play all the time. That big ice golem was a bastard to deal with, and it was great.
Well, so what did actually like? What in terms of tactics? What happened? Like, I get it was awful, but like, was it a thing where you just did you need to spend out like did you need specialized like ice golem slayers eventually, or did you need to like have just teams of people deal with it? Like how did it, I guess, kind of like what kind of tactics did people kind of employ with the ice golem to,
There are a couple of ways
to
that you could deal with it. One of them was getting people with 3 meter pikes to become, in quotation marks, rune warriors, who were people that were designated that could deal damage to it.
mm,
So all of a sudden, like 5 people with 3 meter pikes could just walk up and stab the living crap out of it before it could hit them.
mm,
Right. Um, my personal favorite one was when I got made a rune warrior and I had a glaive in one hand, so just a sword jammed into a stick, and it was like 2 meters long. And I ran after the ice golem because I knew I could dig the butt of the glaive into the ground to stop its weapon while I'd stab the ever living crap out of it with a dagger.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you,
Like, that's the meta.
yeah, I think that's actually really, it's really similar to the way the Romans approached elephants during the Punic Wars. So
Yeah.
Carthage's infamous war elephants. Um, Romans did all sorts of like just stupid shit to try and deal with them. Actually, like they tried to scare them. So they had this like cart that just made really loud noises to try and scare the elephants and just try and get them to rout and rampage through the Carthaginians. One of the things they did that apparently was quite cruel was they'd set pigs on fire. So they covered pigs in pitch and set them on fire and off they go. Which, yeah, as a vegetarian, I really don't approve of. But
Yeah.
they did like a lot of like they just did a lot of weird, goofy shit to try and deal with them. In the end, what the battle that Hannibal lost against Scipio Africanus, what Scipio did was he just drilled his troops to they'd create holes in the line that the elephants would instinctively go down, because the elephants didn't want to necessarily get stabbed. And then once the elephants went through those lines, everyone would just kind of mob them. And I suspect a lot of people died bringing down the elephants this way, but it did work. Like Hannibal's elephant corps was destroyed, and he wasn't really able to follow up.
Yeah.
Which actually, apparently, in Indian warfare, if you want to get a sense of like a real history example of large monsters changing warfare over a period, Indian history is really cool. And I only had a chance to look into it a little. There's a really cool video I'll post to the event by a channel called Odd Compass that looks at Indian history, which is just cool in its own right. They had the same problem where elephants were really terrifying and impressive, but you couldn't. There was this huge struggle because if you had them too close to your own force, they might go berserk and stampede your own guys. But if you let them get too far ahead and go into the enemy, they get mobbed and killed. So you had to kind of follow them up with infantry. It was this I don't know. It's kind of this brinkmanship thing.
We have the same thing happen with our like LARP ones. That it's like if it's too close to your own fighters, it can't really fight effectively. But a bunch of people getting forwards and locking down its weapons or locking it down, suddenly it's just like, yep, everyone just kill it, done.
Is that with the tank and the rhino? And
Yeah. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, we had a big battle just go real arse end up the second that the tank overextended, got destroyed, and no one could get to it to fix it. And then they couldn't bring it back with the same people who were all falling back. And we fell back like a few 100 meters, and then all of a sudden it's like, we lost our tank, and now we're down a whole advantage. And we ended up losing that fight, not by as much as we should have, but because of the overextension, heavily affected the outcome of that fight. Because we just couldn't go back and get it at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and was the enemy able to like take control of the tank as well, like
Now
or
they weren't able to take control of it, but the imbalance of we were relying on that for not only the space, the physical space it took up, but also its constant potential easy damage
Mm.
made up for a lesser force.
I see. Yeah, and so you just
Right? So it's like, our great equalizer is now gone.
yeah,
It's
'cause it's
no
like
longer an equalizer.
yeah, it's, I guess it goes back to kind of that large monster thing as well. I mean, with
Hmm.
elephants, like that was a huge issue was controlling them. I mean, like fair is fair. The reason why, like, there are only particular places in the world where you can have elephants in warfare, because elephants can't be properly domesticated in the sense. Like,
Yep.
you can capture them and you can tame them, you can get them under human control, but you can't.
But
Like, I
it is
mean,
different.
even with conservation, you can't breed elephants in captivity. It's not like it's not like horses or something where you get a bunch and you just kind of you keep them around for like riding and riding and stuff. And if you're not careful, you have to deal with a bunch of a bunch of babies come spring. Um, so and elephants are also like they're only just tameable. Like it's only just manageable as well.
Yeah.
If they're slightly more grumpy, it definitely wouldn't work. But yeah, like the reason you see them in India is because basically the only places you see elephants in warfare are places elephants are native to, and then there's cases like individual elephants ending up in a whole heap of different random places, but where they're used enough that they actually start impacting things is areas they're native to, and that's primarily India. But I guess we've got your large monsters is the question of how intelligent are they and how well supported can they be? Because if you've got
Yeah,
something that
and
is
back to the logistics of living with them, existing with them.
yeah, also like if you got something that's like say a domesticatable animal like the intelligence like a dog or a horse or something that can be trained to do stuff.
Right? And then we've got cavalry, which were bonkers.
Mm,
Right?
yeah,
Like for their effectiveness was just oh
yeah. Well, I think a lot of it also would be like there'd be a big question of holding the reserve and also having or like I mean there'd be if they I suspect there'd be a point where you get specific counter units. Like I know with your LARPs, if you've got like something like a tank or a rhino or an ice golem that just mops up every big event that it goes to, do you get people immediately going, all right, well we need our own we need a specific way to counter this? Um,
yes. Yeah, when it comes to actually trying to do the gameplay side of that, yeah, it's usually that. Usually the first answer is I hate that they have like in quotation marks from people. I hate that they have that and I hate how it affects the game. Da, 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 da. Because like complaining about it is easier than overcoming it.
mm,
Um,
yeah, but
then once they get over that, you do have some people that like they've gone and made like the bombs that are necessary and then hire out these bombs for every fight. Like, hey, you know they're gonna have the tank. Do you want the one thing that can really deal with them?
mm, yeah, so yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of the kind of the really glib answer to the question would be, how large monsters change warfare. You get counter monster units very quickly. They're just or
Trying
you
to
get
capitalize upon that.
oh, either you frozen or I frozen. One is frozen.
Is that coming through all right?
Yeah, it's coming through now. Good now. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I had the little warning thing come up. Um,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah.
we should move forward.
All right. Cool. So next question. Um, Necromancy exists and wizards can reanimate the dead. How does this change warfare? Particularly if the undead are mindless and fearless. Oh fuck yeah!
Yeah, that's a whole heap of fucking no thanks. Psychology of warfare is too important for how like our weapons and humans function. that like there would have been some pretty wild technological differences.
Yeah, well, the other thing I can think of as well is, I mean, the big area where this would affect is actually in morale. Like, people are going to, like, if one side has a necromancer on it, the other side is going to break a lot quicker because they know that once they start dying, their friends are going to get back up and have a go at them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I reckon like the biggest impact would be morale, where you'd have huge problems with people just fleeing. And you'd probably have a bigger emphasis on like espionage and assassination to try and take out, like, necromancers before they can actually do anything.
These atrocities. Yeah.
Yeah, to just do a war crime. I mean, there's probably like a whole weird legal question that is whether or not reanimating the dead would be against the Geneva Convention. But I'm not an international lawyer, so I'm not any kind of lawyer really. So no, I can't answer that. But yeah, like yeah, I think
like if they can't fight well and all they can do is kind of trudge forwards, or if they can fight like a human, like that particular, like if they can fight like a person but be fearless, that'd be fucked. If they fight like a zombie, yeah, all right, just whack it a bunch, settle down.
yeah, or just get like the number. Well, even if they're just like, depends on also numbers. Like, because the other thing is, basically up until actually, it was World War II. World War II was the first war in human history where disease killed fewer people than combat. Every war prior, like World War One, you got trench foot, like disease was just rife. Like the point where like a lot of soldiers would get sick and die. So yeah, like if you've got, I mean, in a situation where reanimating the dead, you've also like, there's no like, you'd have huge problems with like necromancers and stuff, like poisoning water supplies, like deliberately spreading infection, and then in the enemy force, and then reanimating the dead. Like imagine a lot of a lot of it. I mean, a lot of the battles would probably end up being these kind of espionage and counter espionage kind of things, where you're trying to take out you're trying to take out the enemy necromancer before they can raise the dead, and you're trying to sabotage the enemy so that like if you're trying to get the enemy sick so that like spread disease, poison water supplies and stuff, so then you can just raise their own force against them, because you don't you could
don't need to bring a force.
Yeah, you could conceivably do that, so you get this huge kind of espionage, counter espionage kind of thing going. I imagine like with the morale question, you'd probably there'd probably be a lot of effort to try and stop troops from running, like more so than historically. So like you'd probably see people like soldiers being given alcohol before battle, so they're a bit a bit drunker, a bit braver.
And the counseling and religious tones and everything would be turned up to 12 to just try and get them to function.
Yeah, just getting people to stay in the fight. I mean, even like because there's a theory with Viking berserkers that they would eat magic mushrooms before battle. I don't know how like scholastically based this is, or whether this is just like where this is more kind of like those sort of wild kind of just mushrooms do this. Maybe it was drugs that made them berserk. But like I mean, there are magic mushrooms that apparently do that to people. Like just send them into a violent rage. So you might even see a lot of people like people basically being given, like particularly reserves being issued or like being given these mushrooms to eat once the dead start getting back up, once they start reanimating, and just be like, right, well, your job as reserves is take these mushrooms, charge wherever the reanimation is the worst, and just basically go in because you're not going to run away. You're not going to get freaked out at the dead rising and run. But that then also has the other added effect that people are also afraid of the reserves of their own army. You've got like a commissar scenario where but yeah, like I think that would just it'd be nice. I mean, I take your point.
It would be a different fight.
Yeah.
Through and through. It wouldn't be a two armies walk up and biff until something occurs. A lot of the precursor stuff would be totally different.
Yeah, well, and also like it also depends on what range the necromancy can be cast at, like how close the necromancer needs to be. So imagine like it'd be like Warhammer Fantasy Battles if you ever fight like an undead army. Fighting undead army is mostly about just trying to take out the necromancers before the undead army gets too big. Like that's the thing. You just your shock troops, your wood elf war dancers just go in and just try and destroy whatever unit is protecting the necromancer as best you can. Charging some dragon princes or whatever.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, because if you can't do that, the undead army is just going to get too big. But also like because the undead army needs to be close, or the necromancer needs to be close to raise the dead. Yeah, you would have these desperate pushes to take out the enemy. But I mean, you'd also have stuff like so up until the 19th century, and the advent of like essentially sniper rifles, officers needed to be fancier than their troops so that people could look around and see who's in charge. Like that's why officers have swords when regular troops didn't, because it meant that you could be like, oh, what are we doing? I don't ask the dude with the sword. And then sniper rifles came around, and the being visible and in charge became a better thing. But it might be a thing with necromancers as well, that you really you need to find ways to stop, to conceal them, make them look as normal as possible. So it also depends on how visible the necromancy is. If there's particle effects and shit, if there's if the spells are visible from a distance, that's you
then now a target. Let's go only to the target.
Yeah, so sort of, be a thing. I think you get a lot of. I think you'd probably get a lot of counter tactics. It depends. Everything. I guess everything with this depends. You might get people desperately trying to come up with forms of magic that prevent the dead from being reanimated or stuff like that. You'd probably have a magical metagame, but it's kind of a different issue. But I think you'd probably see a lot of tactical difference, and you'd probably see a lot more sort of espionage and effort to deal with the necromancers before the battle.
Yeah, because no one wants to go into a fight with the we might win this. You're gonna take every chance you can, because that's just better warfare.
Yeah. So let's see, we've got. So amateurs talk Yeah,
one in there that was about Guts' sword, but I don't know if you want to put that one up because it did have swearing in it.
I think we're okay. We're not a monetized channel anyway.
Yep.
And so
I've sworn a couple of times. I do apologize. I don't realize when I do it.
It seems to be it's a really Australian thing. It's we just you see it actually when Australians go on TV. There's always this discomfort because the host is like, are they going to accidentally swear on national television? Let's hold it. Where's the comment? Just trying to find the comment. Where it would be.
Just talk dragon logistics. That brings me so much joy.
I love the idea of dragon logistics. I think that'd be a good name for an indie band as well, like a like a folk metal band or something. Yeah, that would
Yeah, yeah.
be logistics. Good band name.
All right, in a fantasy world, or at least something that you want to bring in case of combat. A real comfy fitted breastplate and a helmet with brim. A helmet with brim that keeps sun off my face.
Yeah,
anything less than that would be like that thing that apparently a chainmail underneath their clothes and then getting into fights people
yeah.
and like having that advantage. Like it'd be something like that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this. So, one thing I discovered very recently is that there's a growing community of reenactors who go camping in historical kits. They just they get together, historical historical tents and tarps and stuff, and just go and do just go chill in the wilderness for for a day or two. Um, and there's a lot of videos that are just people doing that, just putting together their campsite and cooking historical food and that. And it's just really soothing to watch. So I've really gotten into it. But yeah, I think with an adventuring kit, I'd want some blankets and a sheepskin or something to sleep on.
Right.
Yeah, or
All the rest
a
of
tarp.
it.
Yeah, and then just some eating and drinking gear and a little fry pan and stuff. That's a good backpack's worth of stuff just there and a few changes of clothes. And then yeah, on top of that, I wouldn't want metal armor and a helmet, probably a helmet at most. Maybe gauntlets, maybe a helmet and gauntlets. But that would be the only metal armor I'd actually want, just because I'd have to carry the fucking thing.
Yeah, right. And that's why I was like, breastplate that can sit on me. I don't need to carry that.
Yeah. Well, I think the gold standard for body armor, and this is kind of why I think pad armor is good. But if you get the right breastplate, will be one that actually spreads the weight of your backpack. You've been walking around. If you get a backpack and stuff, and it's heavy, and you walk around all day, and the straps start to cut into you, or a shoulder bag or something. My back is fucked from just carrying heavy bags for many years. Having some body armor that also distributes the weight, that would be amazing.
That'd be sick.
Yeah, I'd want that. But I'd probably I probably also want a backpack I could take off easily. But other than that, I'd probably have a sword and dagger, or a falchion and dagger kind of thing, or even just a knife that could also be used for chopping
Right.
stuff, like a survival knife kind
Like
of
a
thing.
tool knife that is quite big.
Yeah, well, because you got that, you can use it as a powering device or as a fighting knife if you have to. Yeah, just swords are great because you can wear them, relatively hands free. Might have to hold on to it when you're moving through built confined spaces, a busy tavern or a forest or something. But otherwise, yeah, swords are good because they're easy to carry. And then I probably would take a polearm, like a spear or a glaive or something, to use as a walking stick or as a hiking stick if I'm traveling a lot. Just, you see this in a lot of places. Is you get stick fighting systems that are developed by travelers, Jogo de Pau, which is a Portuguese stick fighting system with a 5 foot long, meter and a half sort of kind of big swingy stick, was developed primarily by travelers, by people just traveling across the countryside. Same with a lot of with a sort of similar Italian stick, two-handed stick tradition. So yeah, it's sort of, because a stick, like a walking stick, is a really useful thing to have when you just.
It is arguably more useful than a sword.
Yeah.
For how much you would use it compared to how good it is that one time you definitely needed it.
Yeah, well, having something like that, I think, would be cool. Just as a having something would just be useful, and then having it also be a weapon like a polearm would be really, really useful. So yeah, that's probably what I go with, is just lightish armor. camp gear and like a sword, dagger, and a sword like survivally knife, and like a spear or a polearm, or like a glaive or a bill. So like big blade, like a machete on a stick kind of thing. Yeah. I think Mosh looks frozen to me, so I hope he isn't talking. To move on. But yeah, I found the question.
Yeah.
Big fuck off berserk sword. So I might actually get a picture. I'm going to get a picture of this sword up just so that we can. It's from anime. I haven't actually seen the anime. I guess it's going to take a little bit longer because I typed in Berserk anime gut, which got kind of different result to Berserk anime guts. Guts being the name of the character. I might just share my screen so people can see kind of what we're talking about. Sorry, screen share.
Crossbows and cardio, bro.
Crossbows and
cardio. Sorry, Jack's comments coming up in the chat just keep making me giggle. They're great.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to them again.
Fuck off Berserk sword.
Alright, so this is the sword, and just a giant fucking weapon. I mean, it's almost like a fucking like a Montante as Zweihandy, this big kind of
right.
Weapon. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like kind of vaguely alright on a battlefield, but it's more of a guard's. It's like an Uzi in the inside of your suit. Like it's definitely better than a sidearm, but it's not a complete battlefield weapon.
Yeah, like a very specialized thing, like just a big fuck off kind of stay away. I've got a big swingy thing. What's
Yeah.
Have you done any? I've done like a little bit of spadone, which is the Italian Montante. Montantes and spadones are just big, like two-handed swords, like big kind of claymore things. And a lot of it really seemed to be more about like crowd control, like denial, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, and that potential damage.
Yeah, I found really, really interesting.
Keeping everyone back.
Yeah. This is in a period where you see like most sword fighting manuals are one-on-one sword fights. Like they don't deal with group situations at all. And then you've got this manual. It's like, here's how to deal with like a bunch of people in this situation, this situation, this situation. And that's it. I didn't do very much of it. I wasn't reading the manuals. I was just kind of doing a class, like doing some classes. So yeah, I might be completely off, but yeah, I think with something like that, I'd probably, how would I deal? I mean, just getting to anywhere dense, like anywhere with a normal ceiling, like this kind of the ceiling of the height of this room, or like lightly wooded area where there's just obstacles, like big swingy weapons. I know, like in anime, they'll cleave through like 3 trees and an armored person, but IRL, like, you're going to start to struggle once you're in a dent, like once you're anywhere kind of dense. That's my cop-out answer.
Yeah.
If there's a big open field, I don't know, like, I don't know what I'd do. Like, because you've done a bit of like you've done stuff with like big two-handed weapons in LARP. I think you were saying before, like you made some of this Zweihander. Have you ever been on the receiving end of giant sword?
Yeah. So like there are some people who've made like berserk-esque kind of swords, and it's out of like a fiberglass core with like maybe a wooden handle and a big foam like sword. And they are battle paddles. Those things get caught in the wind, something fierce. And the repositioning and like trying to use them is rough as guts. I use like a big claymore or a big Zweihander quite often. And that's sick. But those big weapons like that, definitely an artifact of physics that aren't the same as ours.
Yeah, I like the anime ones.
Yeah. How to deal with those things is usually if it stops moving, it's harder for them to get it moving again. So doing anything that makes it no longer a flowy potential damaged weapon is your go-to. However, you can stop it, whether you get a pole arm in the way of it, or you get a shield in the way of it, or something like that. Like anything that stops it going and going and going and going gives you
Yeah,
the advantage and the tempo to be able to do something while it'll have to spend a tempo to start being spooky again, unless they're really good at thrust work.
yeah. For reference, this is a historical example. This is sort of a Montante or a Zweihander. So
Yeah.
sword the size of a person. This is what the historical ones look like.
And they're sick. I adore them. I really do adore them. It's
yeah,
just impossible to use them safely. That like use the steel one. Not sorry, safely is the incorrect thing. To be able to play with them very earnestly
yeah, like
with
actually
people
spar.
without there being artifacts of safety involved.
Yeah. Well, it's, I guess that's kind of the thing with a lot of this sort of like training and simulating combat is you know there's a certain weapons where you just can't. The simulators you need that actually maneuver like them are not safe to use. Like are just
No,
not safe. So you need something that doesn't actually perform like the actual weapon to train with. Um, which
yeah,
yeah,
the big swords I usually use feel like you can move them like lighter long swords and be a shit with them and be a bit of a superhero with them.
yeah, yeah. When you get yeah, and then you know you get the actual ones, and they're big, difficult things to move. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got a
Ah.
shield design is better for HEMA, which is real. Shield design is better for love. I mean, with HEMA, because HEMA is the study of historical fighting systems. It's the answer to that is
Mm.
whatever shield is historical. Like you're not in terms of the goals of HEMA, which is historical exploration. You're going to like
Mm.
you know the good shields are the ones that are historical. The bad shields are the ones that are not. Um,
A historical, yeah.
yeah. So I mean, like there are things like the dueling medieval dueling shields, like the sort of tell off of dueling shields. I have to get a photo of these up as well.
I want one
Um,
of those one day. They're just so dumb.
no, yeah, that's yeah. I'll get I'll get one of them. I'll just get a photo up so people can see what we're talking about because yeah, they are really really just ridiculous. Um, but yeah, this is we're talking. These are things that were designed for judicial dueling, and they're designed. There's an argument that they're actually designed to be counterintuitive and weird, so that only people who can afford training in a weapon can be skilled with them. And because they're used for settling legal disputes, it means that you need to have money and to be able to afford like a specific trainer for just this thing. Whereas like with swords, by this sort of period, swords were common enough that unless you were quite like anyone who was sort of middle class, even like a peasant after a few good harvests could afford a sword. Whereas, and could muck around, and like anyone could learn to sword fight by just mucking around with their friends with some sticks. Whereas, with one of these things, they're so bizarre and counterintuitive that unless you've had someone who's really worked out how to use them, you're not going to pick it up.
Yeah.
This is not a weapon I would choose to use against other weapons, but like in a HEMA context, the only time you'll ever use this is against someone with the same weapon. Like people doing, these kinds of people just doing it either with also accompanied with a sword or, just using just the shield and like whacking each other with a shield. So yeah, I guess to sort of take the question in good faith and go, what kinds of shields, or like shields of the shields used in him which are good. Bucklers are fantastic. Um, like there's a reason they get used for such a long period in history is for one-on-one combat. A small buckler is more useful. Like I've tried using the big Viking round shields against a buckler, and I'm just like, it's a freaking nightmare. Like it's so the big shield is so cumbersome. Um, so yeah, like there's a reason why bucklers were used so often, and why you see bucklers not just in Europe but also in Africa. The bucklers are quite common throughout African history. Even up to like Nigiri stick fighting, where they have like a buckler, or like a buckler made of leather or made of cow hide in one hand with and holding onto a stick as well. So you've got this parrying side, and you've got a stick in the other side that you whack people with. It's just, if you check it out, like if you just do like a YouTube search for Zulu stick fighting, it's really cool. Um, but yeah, like bucklers are good and effective for one-on-one combat. Um, Tages, like strap shields, are okay. They're okay. They're decent. I
think Taj is sick, but that's bias.
Yeah, well, you've done a lot more with them. I find actually a Taj is a lot harder to use if you don't know how to use one. Like it's a lot harder to just pick up a Taj and use it than it is a buckler for some reason.
They are hot garbage to try. Like if you've got no idea what you're doing with it, it will actually put you in positions and distances that are improper for it. But if you're just trying to assault someone where you've got your like saber or broadsword in one hand and a Taj in the other, it's like cool, as long as you're attacking people, it kind of makes more sense. And then it's hot garbage.
Yeah, what?
My answer for this is just the North kite shields. Those things are just the most meta bullshit shields in existence.
Especially if you're not allowed to go for the face ahead. It's like metal weapons.
Yeah.
Are like the only thing that came second in terms of frustration in Viking weapons, metal weapons reenactment to javelins was kite shields, because the kite shield covered from shoulder to mid shin. You couldn't, because you're using an open face helmet, you can't attack the face. And also most metal weapons reenactment groups are weak and don't allow attacks to the arms. Like don't score it. You can hit the arms, but it doesn't score. And so the only way to take out someone with a Norman kite shield was either to blindside them from like out of their field of vision, which is really hard to do, nigh impossible one-on combat, or to hit them directly on the head. And guess where their sword would be? Is sitting directly above their
St. George's.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because like they just you're not gonna hit. And you just like it's such a bollocks thing. And like it's an artifact of rules. I found trying kite shields with fencing masks. I ended up trying to do like reenactment where all the combat was using HEMA gear, unless it was like a Viking Age weapon, which is how I got into Viking weapons. But then just doing like all the other cool reenactment stuff, like making food and drinking mead and like costuming and stuff, like all the kind of the other really cool stuff with reenactment. But I think, but like kite shields are just, when you've got a rule set that disallows high strikes, kite shields are just
they gets a bit silly.
Yeah.
Which the same thing happens in LARP. But then also you don't have to protect the top of your head. Yeah, right. Like when I've cracked the shits at a game or something, I'm like really cranky, I go grab like this max size, slightly curved round kite shield that I can punch grip. And like I get to be invincible for free for a bit and like not be cranky anymore.
Yeah.
I just think they're the best. For cognitive load for outcome, Like, I think they're ridiculous.
Yeah, I'll just especially when you like you've got limit. The other thing as well is when you can't grapple. It's like the one thing I
Yeah.
found with kite shield is if you harass the sword arm, which can only really come from one side, that you just keep attacking the sword arm until you get close. If you've got like just a sword and buckler or whatever, as soon as you can grapple, there's massive, awful encumbrance where you've got this person who only has to focus on being on one side of you, and the rest of you is locked up. It's like so I had a situation where a, quite like a person who would have been about 5'2" got given a kite shield, and eventually my solution was
Oh,
I had a very small, like a small Viking round shield and a sword, and what I ended up doing is just basically closing off the one line they were going to attack on, surging in and just cuddling them, cuddling onto them, and then eventually my sword through and stabbing them. That was just yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it was so that was yeah. I mean, I guess like yeah, I mean, with HEMA and LARP, I guess like what shield is best is going to be an artifact of the rules. Whereas like
Yeah.
historically, what shield is best is very situational. I will say for
An
like
artifact of the rules of engagement at that point, like
yeah,
of what technology is available and what tactics are being utilized.
yeah. This is a question. What kind of wacky interactions does one get from fantasy's habit of taking random cultures and time periods and smashing them together? Um,
Ah, what I just said. Right,
yeah,
like technology that just shits on other technology. Something fierce.
yeah. What's I think so. I mean, there's a big logistics element to that as well, where if you
Mm,
have a less technologically advanced civilization that is big and powerful and wealthy, that encounters a more technologically advanced but less economically powerful civilization, you end up with two civilizations. You end up with a big wealthy civilization that has the best technology. I mean, like basically what gave Europe the advantage from sort of the Columbian Exchange onwards is that once Europeans had basically invaded and started colonizing the Americas, was they controlled this huge trade route, so they're incredibly wealthy, so they could afford the best gunsmiths, they could afford the best gear, and so yeah, and then like Europeans very quickly colonized like anywhere that wasn't a large, powerful empire, and the empires that basically held out. So all the areas that held out the longest, like India and China, um, lasted until there was internal political division and then collapsed. Like the Mughals collapsed, India divulged in civil war, and well, a British corporation came in and basically took over, and then China society started to stagnate. They collapsed, became very hierarchical and collapsed, and became dominated by foreign powers. But yeah, like I mean, you said actually you do see it with India because India was tremendously wealthy until colonization, until the British basically came in and looted the entire country, including taking the word loot, which was originally Indian. No, that's yeah, but India had like Indians. India didn't have much of a domestic gunsmithing tradition, um, so they just basically just import. They just bought a whole heap of guns and gunsmiths from Europe, and then adapted them. And actually, the other thing, they had some really cool stuff as well. Like the Indians had swivel guns, those guns you normally see on ships, but they mounted them on the back of camels, and so they had these mobile, like really small cannons that would just go around, and the camels would then sit down on this
oh,
platform, and it's just yeah. I
fuck.
I
That
really wish I
sounds
had more time.
horrid.
It is, but probably
Like to
well,
deal with. Like if someone had that in front of me, it's like, oh, yeah, there are some distinct answers to beating that, but they're not going to be easy at all.
yeah, no, it was, yeah, apparently, yeah, really quite like decisively powerful. But yeah,
Yeah.
um, so I guess I mean, I think taking random cultures, you're going to see a lot of exchange. So it's like in fantasy, you see like Vikings with two-handed swords, and a lot of you know historical nerds will nitpick and point out that two-handed swords didn't really appear until well over 100 years after the Viking Age had ended. But here's the thing: if the Vikings have contact with a culture that has the metallurgy to make two-handed swords, they're going to end up with two-handed swords pretty freaking quick,
Yeah.
um, because two-handed swords are cool and people are going to want them. So yeah,
And
you don't.
tech is tech.
Yeah, well, like, and yeah, like it's sort of whenever you see two random sort of civilizations make contact, they exchange stuff. So like I mean, you look at like when the Europeans were making contact with different cultures, like people just adopted stuff really quickly. It's like the Japanese had adopted muskets. They got muskets from some very early, very limited contact. I think it was actually a Spanish ship that got blown off course or something. And the Spanish ended up trading muskets with the Japanese. The Japanese worked out how to reverse engineer them. They localized the design, so the Japanese muskets were designed to be more weather resistant because Japan has a much better climate. And they did that, like that was off very minimal European contact, because they're just like, yeah, this is a cool thing, let's take it and make it our own. So you're going to see with any kind of culture, you're going to see various forms of cultural exchange very quickly. So I mean, I guess it depends on what the cultures are. um, I mean, more so than warfare, you're going to see trade of ideas, you're going to see trade stuff. Probably the biggest thing is you're going to see trade of spices, food, like like
The
people
rest
talk.
of life.
Yeah, people talk about like weapons being exchanged, but like fuck it, like noodles. Like noodles got to Europe and became spaghetti. I mean, that's why like you get like spaghetti in Italy, like famously began life. Well, the inspiration for that was Chinese noodles, but noodles got to Europe before there was really widespread contact with Asia, like direct contact with Asia.
Yeah.
Food just, I mean, you see as well, like the Crusades absolutely redefine European cuisine. This is where we get like things like cinnamon and citrus fruits, because yeah, people will exchange food, people exchange ideas, and then I guess after that, it's sort of there's going to be this period of hybridization, like cultural hybridization, um, and then yeah, sort of depends on how close the cultures are. Um, so yeah, like I guess I mean it really does depend on similar cultures, but you wouldn't get a situation where you've got like one culture that is using like stone tools and stone weapons when there's a culture they have regular contact with that has steel. I mean, like if they can trade, they will find a way to trade for it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I mean, the only other thing is, I guess the other thing from world building perspective, when you're getting if you're getting cultural contact for the first time, you're also going to have to worry about disease. But if you've just got like if you've just got a fantasy setting where you're like, right, let's get some Vikings in there, and some high medieval knights and some Zulus and stuff, you're going to see a very rapid equalization of technology, um, and um, probably other exchanges as well. Like you also wouldn't have a situation where one group has a domesticated animal that the other doesn't, unless it's a really specific reason. Like I know in Africa, the tsetse fly made like the transfer of horses quite difficult, which is why you don't see Zulu cavalry during the Zulus didn't have cavalry during the Zulu Wars. But even then, like the Songhai Empire had essentially knights, like mounted heavy cavalry, also like very skilled light cavalry as well, because they're just like horses are awesome, and they had the money, so they imported a shit ton of them and just basically managed to breed horses that were resistant to tsetse flies. So, yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, no, and that's yeah, pretty spot on. Because it's yeah, the random cultures and time, especially the time periods and smashing them together, it's suddenly a massive tech difference that slams in something fierce.
Yeah.
And like the tech is rarely so far improved that it'd be like
Mm.
that an old answer would be the answer again.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of. I mean, I
So
guess.
like a full plate knight against an officer with a pistol is still an officer with a pistol.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah. I guess, yeah. It's. I guess it's a thing where, like, I mean, it depends on the world as well. Like, are you talking about a recent contact of like two cultures, or are you talking about two cultures that existed with knowledge of each other for a period? Yeah. It's sort of.
but somehow still stayed plate while another group got good at throwing rocks at each other or like
Mm,
it doesn't happen,
yeah.
which is what makes a lot of the fantasy things kind of get a little clunky.
Yeah. I mean, my solution to that is again like is economics basically. Is like, yeah, you could
Yeah.
have one faction that has a lot of full plate armor and a lot of full plate armor and a lot of heavy cavalry and weird inventions because their cult, like their empire, their state, whatever, is wealthier. You know, like the dudes with all the armor probably have like lands rich in gold or something. I mean, you could conceivably have like a essentially a bronze based civilization fighting people with like iron and steel weapons if that civilization has good or like has good access to like copper and tin um,
Mm.
to make bronze, but doesn't have good access to iron. But like even then, they're gonna like they're wealthy, they're officer class now, they're going to import iron and steel weapons. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but no, you can explain it with like socioeconomic differences because like here's the thing: there's plenty of examples of cultures making contact where they like they borrow and take ideas from each other, but they don't reproduce each other. Like the Japanese adopted European style muskets and breastplates, but they changed what they did adopt. They changed like the steel breastplates they adopted have a different design and a design differently to the European ones. Like they changed the design and lacquered them and incorporated into their own armor. They still kept using katanas and wakasashis and naganatas and things like that, but they just incorporated into their own warfare. So you're not going to get assimilation, but what you are going to get is you're also not going to get a situation where there is one group that's more technologically advanced than the others. Like it's going to be a case of if they have a technological advantage, it's because that technology is economically prohibitive to everyone else. Like, you know, it's like, the groups that resisted Europeans, like the Maori, when the Maori Wars, they had to work out what they could trade and how they could get muskets primarily from the German states because they couldn't make them themselves. Like it was economically prohibitive, so they were limited in how many muskets they could have. But they still had some because they were able to trade for them. Cool. So, someone said a popular misconception, but the latest discoveries show humans arrived in America thousands of years before mass extinctions. Yeah, it's not like humans rock up and all the megafauna dies. It's humans put a lot of pressure on megafauna, and then you get like environmental decay. Um, like it's usually a generational process. It's not instantaneous. That's the same with Australia. Like you do, interestingly in Australia, there's actually cave art like rock art of creatures that have been extinct for thousands of years, which is just kind of cool. Um, but yeah, like yeah, it's not like humans rock up and megafauna dies. It's usually like it takes a few hundred years. I guess if you're saying thousands of years, that would suggest that there's like like another factor like environmental change. But yeah, humans still like there's a, like it's still the fact that the only megafauna around and only megafauna that's been around in like 2,000 years or so is megafauna that's evolved with humans. Yeah. So cool. How much does magic being a real threat change your tactics? According to Brett, um, depends on the magic. I know. This Mosh, have you dealt with magic in LARPs?
Yeah, like it does show up. Some LARPs don't do it much because it can be really hard to organize and do. I've been able to do some games like in Sydney where they're quite prevalent, and usually it ends up with bean bags getting thrown.
Mm.
Bean bags getting thrown at each other, or like biodegradable bean bags full of seed, like bird seed.
Mm.
Um, how much does magic being a real threat change your tactics? It becomes just a weird interaction. It either becomes
Mm.
a weird interaction of projectile weapon, where like the outcome is less wounds in quotation marks and more just an outcome, or it's fire, so then it's the same as throwing rocks hard.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like so like it ends up just another projectile,
Mm.
or you're dealing with things that fuck around with the physics of everything where like suddenly I can make someone fly 5 foot backwards for free. Like that can be a massive game changer because that puts them out of the fight for a few tempo,
Mm.
right? Which is the same as your friend going to flank at a dumb time. Like, thanks, bud. Um, or suddenly they cannot move, or their weapon flies out of their hand, or something like that. It becomes like these weird tempo buy-ins that affect not only the person you're doing it to.
Mm. Yeah, you sort of you get this weird. It's sort of like I guess the more I think about the question, the more I'm like, it really depends on the magic as well. Like,
Yeah.
um, I mean, I've actually sort of as an extension of this, I've got if wizards can teleport groups of people anywhere instantly, how does that change things? Well, I mean, it's you just yeah.
Right. No, nothing personnel, kid.
I mean, well, make sieges.
Logistics.
Yeah, actually, logistics is a
Yeah.
like just being able to teleport, like teleporting. You know, as soon as like people start getting sick, you just teleport them to you just teleport them, to a hospital. Just bang. I mean, that would control disease in the camp and stuff quite a lot. But
Right.
yeah, a lot of. I
Like being
mean,
able to put people somewhere suddenly 90% or 90 some, I would hazard to even say 100% of our defenses, our stagnant defenses with human fortification would be rendered useless.
yeah, even a small like. I mean, depending on how long, like just a small group of people teleported into a fort would just be hell because you'd have to start. I mean, you'd have to have constant. You'd either have to have a way of detecting the magic with other magic, or you'd need to have constant patrols, basically checking for is there a small group of people who are going to come in now in our fortification and setting things on fire,
Yeah.
or even actually, even in battles like this. One of the reenactment battles I watched, there's a case where it was like a very small group of people. It was something like three or four basically peeled off and were able peeled off and just didn't get noticed or something, like just didn't get noticed because the rest of the force was backing off, and they just got behind the other army and just like we're talking about an army of like would have been like 200-300 people, so not big group but not historical battle size, but just getting behind them and being able to run up unnoticed and just start stabbing people in the back, and then just and then they just run off. If someone note, as soon as people start turning around to try and deal with them, they just run off again. And they devastated. Like they would have taken out like heaps of people, like double digits worth of people, and just having like, let's say like a small group, like let's say like 10 people can get, like a wizard can teleport 10 people in a battle, like 10 people, 10 elite troops, 10 shock troops behind a line, just coming in and cleaving up and attacking spontaneously. Like that's going to disorder your enemy. And if that happens right before a main charge, yeah, like that's, you teleport people in, they disrupt, and then like a minute, and like a minute later, half a minute later, the main force comes in the other side. Like, yeah, that's gonna. I mean,
Even the potential,
you'd have to. I mean,
having that potential of someone's going to be behind me,
hmm,
the cognitive load on every soldier would suddenly jump, and their ability to fight with what's in front of them will suddenly be that way.
hmm,
And like the stress of it would skyrocket, and like you wouldn't see fights the way that we've seen them occur, because everything would just be completely different. It'd be fights where you're constantly setting up all these ways of keeping people from being able to get behind you, but if they do, that it's a mistake. Like figuring out weird like
yeah.
just trying to think of that whole interaction of like what you would do to stop that being the correct thing to do.
I mean, well, when I was doing reenactment combat, one of the things I discovered one of the things I discovered as a way of dealing with being blindsided, because particularly as a university group, it took me about 3 years to have 2 years experience on most people there. And so most people's solution to that in group combat was just to hit me when I wasn't looking. And so my
Yeah.
solution was just to always be running. So I'm not the fastest of runner, although I was fast. Actually, I was actually faster than a lot of people I was fencing with at the time, like in the group at the time. But that's not either. But I was fast enough that it was very, very difficult for someone to get behind me and hit me.
Yeah.
And because I was running, if they did, even just like just looking around when I'm moving meant that, like just being able to look around when I wasn't an immediate threat meant that I could keep an eye on what was going on around me. And that worked fairly
Yeah.
effectively. So, I mean, you could have, if you've got teleportation, you might end up having very, very mobile warfare where you get, rather than having like big mass armies, you have small groups of people moving constantly and also moving in formations where they can watch each other's backs, which
Yeah.
is like freaking chaotic as shit. But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, something that would almost be like a tongue-in-cheek reference to chess might occur,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
I
each
guess,
small group is akin to a chess piece.
yeah. Probably like just, yeah, or like, and I mean, it'd actually probably be kind of like the Battle of the Nations, like the Booherd HMB kind of things, where like small groups and small teams and individuals moving around a lot, trying to flank and blindside the enemy, without being flanked or blindside themselves. Like that kind of, I mean, you see it like there's particularly like the sort of like if you watch like the Battle of the Nations battles, particularly like it's like 21 versus 21, I think it's very normal. You've got like little groups that'll peel off and try and sneak around, and yeah, it's
Mm,
actually very, very mobile. Which, given that they're wearing like what, like 20, 30 kilos of armor, is really impressive. Um,
yeah.
like,
Yeah, the team fight is a much more mobile thing.
mm,
It's only when you're dealing with so many people that it starts to maybe change a little. Like even 200 to 300 aside is still quite a mobile fight,
yeah,
and mobility in a 300-person side will still be destructive.
mm. Yeah, definitely. All right, so unfortunately, we're getting quite late. We've gone about an hour over what I expected. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, wow. So let's go. Let's do one more question, then we'll finish up. So,
Yep.
since you're the S Mosh, is there a question you want to answer?
Um, I can't scroll down in the chat to see what the previous ones were. So
Okay, I'm going to put Jack's comment up, not because I want to answer it, but just because it's funny.
yeah,
Especially about my
right.
ability.
I want to make a HEMA fitness club called that, where we just get
Crossbows
like
are
real
coming
jacked, right, and just use crossbows for our back workouts. Done. Just loading crossbows and taking pot shots at protein drinks, like empty bottles. Your back will be absolutely shredded by the end of it.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
the
it's
constant rowing of like loading up the crossbow.
yeah. Um, like yeah. It's actually that's a point worth covering. Not a lot of people is bows like medieval missile weapons that require a lot of strength. Like
Oh yeah,
if you're not
and
if
like
you're
from a young age,
hmm,
being trained into it.
I think I having done archery, honestly think that is having done archery. That's I think a lot of that is just a strength component. Like
Yeah.
yeah, you get like get like some like get like some tradies or something who are just strong from like lifting bricks and stuff all day. You know, like and give the you could probably get them shooting arrows fairly like effective war bows pretty quickly because they've got the strength to do it. But like you do like archery in camp and stuff, it doesn't take that long to get decent at it. But just like when you've got like a war bow, the strength component. And
Yeah.
same with crossbows as well. Like even though they've got like they're mechanically assisted, it's still a similar thing. That's like it's fucking.
Hmm.
You see this in pop culture all the time. I saw this actually a lot in reenactment. You get a lot of like little sort of, I'll say nerd boys because it was always cis men. It just always was. Who'd be like, oh, like close combat, but you're strong and manly. And then I'm like, yeah, dude, weak weak people don't use war bows because the pull is so great. Like
Yeah,
honestly,
nah.
one of the things that let me get into
Like
archery
you
was
need to be a
actually
unit.
yeah. One of the reasons I could get into archery was able to get into archery more recently, like the last few years, was that I started doing weights. When I was at uni, before I started doing like boxing and wrestling, because also doing kettlebells at the same time, I tried to do archery. I was just awful at it because I just didn't have the strength. But I could wield a sword fine. I could pick up a sword, had to pull my blows, that kind of thing. Like it was easy. It was yeah. So let's have a look. So I didn't put up stupid comments. I do want to actually I'm just trying to find a question that is because most of the comments are like really context specific and there's some good ones, but I don't know the full context. So it's really, really hard to just
Yeah.
like, here's the answer. All right, so I've got a comment. For reference, the reload speed for bows. If you do mounted archery, you average 3 rounds in 10 seconds without looking. That's that's pretty freaking quick. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, for archery, yeah, I think that's yeah. One of the things I learned about archery as well, having done it, your reload speed is very dependent on the power of your bow. Like you see, a lot of the people who do speed shooting, they're using really, really light bows. Like you can tell from watching the arrows shoot long distance where they lose velocity really quickly. They're like really,
Yeah.
really like low strength bows, because otherwise you can't draw. Whereas I think like a war bow, you'd have a lot more trouble. Um, so yeah, I guess with mounted archery, I mean, I don't know, like it depends. Honestly, because the other thing that's surprisingly physically demanding, that people don't expect is riding is incredibly physically demanding. Like just doing like if you want a really good whole body workout, take up horse riding. So
Yeah.
yeah, I probably someone like low pound like like a low poundage bow from a low pound, like or like a medium poundage bow, like one that's good enough force to actually like hurt a person from from an experienced rider with a lot of strength, probably could get a good deal of speed out. Like you might be able to do 3 hours and 10 seconds.
Yeah, and
Without looking. Yeah, it's I think the without looking part as well. Like a lot of historical missile weapon use was just you shoot at a group of people. Um,
yeah,
but
you're not taking precise shots. You're just hoping it's potentially going to cause damage.
yeah, no, definitely. It just trying to like get someone. Cool. So we might round out there, sort of. Um, just while we're here. So I think my final comment for the night is always, if you enjoyed a talk and would like to support, the Old Sword Club and what we do ask for PayPal donations. So if you can just click the link, it'll be in the video description if you're on YouTube, or the event description if you're on Facebook. Although I just posted it to Facebook. So yeah, like the money goes to keeping the club afloat. So we just spent about $400 all up on like all of our sort of web hosting and SSL certificates and domain registration, and also like subscriptions for all of the software we use. So, and that's gonna last us a few years, but still, it's a big bite out of our bank account. And we're also going to need to start paying paying for sort of hall hire and insurance as we actually go back to doing physical classes. So, if you did enjoy this and you can pitch in, I'd really appreciate it. Money goes to basically making sure this sort of stuff keeps happening. Obviously, we're still going to keep doing stuff for free because we want to bring sword fighting to the masses. But and on that, big thank you to Mosh for agreeing to come on and just engage in this bullshit with me.
Yeah, it was sick. I was pretty anxious about this, but like it's come together really cool.
Yeah, no, it's gone well. Like it's kind of
did any of that come through at all?
A bit did. Yeah, I think you
Yep.
said, but yeah, you mentioned you're anxious. I was also anxious, but I always take heart that if I'm just a babbling mess who doesn't make sense, at least like people can enjoy laughing at me. So, I
I apologize. My connection has gone to garbage in the last like minute and a half.
So what was that? Your connection. As you were saying that your connection did actually fuzz out. But yeah, I think probably on that note we should finish up. So thanks again everyone for attended. If you're watching this, like, share, subscribe, post this to your HEMA group or your LARP group or your Dungeons role playing group, and yeah, just see you next time. We will have another talk next week. I don't know what it is, but
Second.
yeah, I'll see you then.